What's up guys, Humphrey here. So I made today's video to give you guys some major tips on the best financial strategies as well as milestones to hit depending on how much money you're bringing in. We'll have 3 different buckets of income that we're going to be talking about today. So whether you make 40K per year, 75K per year, or 100K and above, we have something for you. And the main reason I made this video is that the strategies that you might employ at the $40,000 salary level are going to be different than say if you make $150,000 or more. So let's get right into it and let's talk about some strategies if you make around $40,000 per year. When I first graduated college, my starting salary was $38,000 working a customer service job at a video game company, and I remember this time being quite difficult, but still somewhat possible. I think when you're at this salary level, I think it's important to acknowledge that you can make life work, and while it is difficult, it's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, I respect anybody that can make a $40,000 salary as well as make life work, because out of all the income levels that we're going to be talking about today, this is the level where the finances matter the most. That's because every single dollar is way more important at this income level. When you're at this level, if you're able to save 10% of your gross income towards your other goals, I think this is going to be really key. And I think there are 3 major goals that we really want to accomplish at this income level. And the first is not having any consumer debt or any BNPL or buy now, pay later debt. Now, having any sort of consumer debt at any income level is going to really suck, but at the $40,000 salary range, every dollar matters a lot more. So having consumer debt, let's say with an interest rate of 10%, is really going to compound your problems. The average take-home pay of someone making $40,000 gross per year is about $2,700 in take-home per month. And that $2,700 needs to cover your rent, your groceries, your transportation, and ideally some savings and investments. So even an extra $100 per month in credit card interest could be the difference between you making rent or not, or you being able to save for retirement or not. The average savings rate in America right now is a dismal 3.8%, and the average credit card balance in America varies by age, but generally the average is about $5,700. So I think one of the first strategies of this $40,000 income level is to try to clear off this debt. And if you're able to save, let's say 7.5% or even 10% of your gross income and put it towards your debt, this is going to be really helpful. Once you've done that, the second goal is to kind of set up your financial foundation. So have your emergency fund set up, start investing in your Roth IRA, and start looking at other types of investments. I'm sure if you've watched my channel before, you know the importance of having at least a 3-month emergency fund, as well as starting to contribute to a Roth IRA where your earnings are going to grow tax-free. The strategy here is that if you don't have any emergency fund at all, you want to save that 7 to 10% from step 1 or goal number 1 of this income bracket and put it towards that. So ideally you have 3 months of an emergency fund set up before you start investing in a Roth IRA. And so that means if your take-home pay is about $2,700 a month, and let's say you spend $2,000 a month on your expenses, you want to have at least a $6,000 emergency fund saved up. After that, you can start putting some of your paycheck into a Roth IRA, and the contribution limits for that right now under the age of 50 are $7,000 a year, and over the age of 50, it's about $8,000 per year. Now, some of you might find that saving 10% of your gross income is actually quite difficult, and if it is, just wait till the next section where I talk about budgeting and tracking your expenses. So, quick message from today's sponsor. One of the issues that I faced when I was making about $40,000 per year before I started tracking my expenses was actually keeping track of subscriptions. I genuinely would forget that I signed up for subscriptions through different mobile apps, and when I began my expense tracking journey, I was shocked to find out at how much money was going towards apps I didn't even use anymore. And trust me, $10 per app every month adds up. Now let's talk about the third goal at the $40,000 level, which is that we should start looking for ways to make a little bit of extra money. Now you don't have to go out and get an entirely new career or even switch jobs, but if you're able to make some extra money on the side doing what you already know, or perhaps investing in yourself to learn a new skill, that could be well worth it. A good way to think about this is that if you make $40,000 per year, that is the equivalent of about $20 per hour, given the fact that there are about 2,000 hours in a work year. So if you're able to find a side hustle that pays at least $20 per hour, or sometimes even $30 or $35 per hour, then your time is going to be very efficient, and actually you're making more money for your time. If you're having trouble thinking about the different ways that you can earn more money, my favorite way to think about this is like, think about all the knowledge that you know that you can trade to others. So let's pretend you're good at the guitar, perhaps you've been playing since you were a kid, or maybe been in some bands. You can start to trade this knowledge that you have to others for hopefully a higher hourly rate than what you were getting paid in your day job. If you don't want to pick up a new skill or a side hustle, I completely understand, but if you have an occupation already, what you can do is actually pursue a certification or a credential that can instantly boost your salary. So Monster.com launched a report that outlined the top 10 certifications in all industries, and for example right here, if you work worked in the logistics and transportation industry, you could become a certified automotive fleet manager. And the median pay of someone not holding this certification is $55,000 a year, versus if you had the certification, you could start making upwards of $70,000 per year. So that is another option. Look around in your industry and see what types of credentials or certifications can actually boost your salary. Okay, so that brings us to the next income bracket in this video, which is the $75,000 level. This is the median income of a household in America. Things here actually start to change up quite a bit. You can see here that the take-home pay of $75,000 a year is going to be right around $55,826. That comes out to $4,652 per month, which actually gives us a little bit more room to work with. The biggest things that you can do at this income bracket are the following. First, if you haven't already done so, make sure your highest interest rate debts are paid off, like we mentioned earlier in the $40,000 bracket. Then after that is taken care of, it's time to start thinking more longer term to start targeting financial freedom. In order to do that, I actually have 3 strategies for you guys for this income level, but they're not actually exclusive just to this income level, but I do think that they fit in this income level appropriately. The first is going to be budgeting and tracking our expenses, and basically what we want to do here is build out a really good habit for tracking how much money is coming in versus how much is going out, and what of the money that is going out, what we're actually spending it on. This is going to be especially important if we have a family, because now we have more people in our household that we need to keep track of, and therefore the expenses are going to be quite variable. Once you figure out how much you're spending on every single category, we want to cut relentlessly all the things that we are spending money on that are actually not fulfilling us or driving us forward. So for example, let's pretend that you go through the exercise of tracking all of your spending and you realize, hey, maybe I spend a little bit too much money on shopping.
So your total comes to $8,432.37.
Don't worry about that. You got
Perhaps you're an impulse shopper that every time you go to the mall, you like to buy something new. Well, instead, what you can do to curb this behavior is, like, the next time you go to the mall, try to put that item that you really want to buy on hold for 24 hours. Then if you still want it after 24 hours, you can go back to the shop and actually get it. But what I actually find is that when we think deeper about our own decisions and our own purchases, what we actually might find is that we don't actually need a lot of the things that we buy. Another way to cut back on a certain category is to set yourself a firm budget. So let's say it's $200 per month on shopping, and then put that actually in cash in an envelope. Now you know that the maximum that you can spend in that category is the $200 in the envelope. Every time you go and actually spend, you physically see the money leaving your envelope, and that actually hurts psychologically a lot more. The number 2 strategy at this income level is to actually start tracking your net worth, your savings, and your investing rates. Just like dieting or going to the gym, if you start tracking what you eat and how much weight you're actually lifting, you have more awareness about how healthy you are in the gym, and the same goes with finances. So here's a table of the median net worth in America by age by Empower, the retirement company, and how much you should have saved based on a Fidelity study. So this table is really interesting because if we look at the median net worth by age for everybody here, they kind of seem a little bit on the low end. If you watch my channel regularly, you're likely taking steps to improve your overall financial health. So I think a good objective or a good goal for us viewers to have on this channel is to at least aim for double the median net worth in America. If we look at Fidelity's guidelines and how much money you should have saved for retirement, their suggestions are way above the median net worth, and so that's kind of why I said that we should probably also aim for double as well. Now, to illustrate this point further, the median net worth of someone in their 30s here is $34,691, but according to Fidelity, by the time you are 30, you should have at least 1x your salary saved for retirement. So if you make $75K a year, that means by the time you are 30, you should have $75,000 saved in your retirement as well as your taxable brokerage accounts combined together. You can see that by the time you're the age of 40, you should have at least 3x your salary saved. So at a $75,000 income range, that's going to be $225,000. I think what this Fidelity study just really emphasizes to me is that if you want to retire comfortably, we need to actually be really shooting for a higher net worth than what the median is in America. All right, my third strategy for this income bracket kind of ties into the previous one, which is that we need to really target a savings rate that will get us to a comfortable retirement. Now, depending on your age, this savings rate is going to differ quite a lot, and depending on how much you have saved already, it also differs a lot as well. If you've been saving 10% of your gross income every single year since the age of 21, you're likely in a very good financial position. However, if you're the age of 40 and you have nothing saved for retirement, then your target savings rate needs to be a lot higher than the 21-year-old counterpart that we just talked about. So let's take a look at someone making $75,000 per year and 3 hypothetical situations where they have $0 saved. Fidelity recommends that by the time you're the age of 67, you have 10x your salary saved, so we're gonna go with $750,000 in today's example. If you're the age of 30 with $0 saved, you need to start saving and investing at least 4.6% of your income every single year in order to have a balance of $750,000 by the time you're 67. Now, at the age of 40, that goes up to a 10.67% savings rate, or you need to save about $8,000 per year. And if you wait 10 years longer after that, if you're the age of 50 and you have nothing saved at all, then you actually need to save 27.4% of your gross income at $75,000 per year in order to retire with $750,000. You can see that with more time, you can actually get away with a lower savings rate, but the older and older that you get, you actually have to play a lot of catch up. That's why starting from a young age is so important and being consistent with it every single year. And if you're able to save 10%, 15%, maybe even upwards of 20%, then you're gonna be in a really good financial position. One of the ways to hit these Fidelity suggested savings numbers on autopilot basically is to contribute to your Roth IRA and try to max it out every single year. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but if you're able to compound $7,000 per year in a Roth IRA, which means all the gains are tax-free, then you're gonna be pretty much on autopilot to become a millionaire by the time you're 67. I have so many videos about the Roth IRA that I will link down below in the description as well. All right, we've made it to the $100,000 income level and above, and if you are at this level, you're likely comfortable in most cost of living cities. Your bills are taken care of, and you probably aren't living paycheck to paycheck, and even in the highest cost of living cities, you can still make $100,000 per year salary work. At this stage, I think the first thing that we need to really pay attention to is lifestyle creep or lifestyle inflation. Every time you get a pay raise above $100,000, you're likely gonna have way more disposable income, and what do people like to do with more disposable income? They like to buy things to improve their quality of life. I'm all for doing that to an extent, but just because now you can afford a nicer car, nicer house, or even nicer clothes, it doesn't mean that you should do so even if you can afford it. Living under your means is not only a really great way to accumulate wealth, but it's also a great way to keep your peace of mind and freedom when it comes to money. The idea here is that if you start increasing your costs on an everyday basis or every month basis, it's going to start adding a lot more stress into your life, and that stress is pretty much unnecessary. So if you are making more money, for example, and you actually want to buy, like, let's say a new car, I think that's actually reasonably fine as long as it's still within your budget. A popular car buying rule is the 24-10 rule. That's where you can put 20% down on a car, finance the car for no more than 4 years, and your monthly payments on the car should not be more than 10% of your gross monthly income. So if you currently have a car with a car payment that takes up 5% of your gross monthly income, I see no problem in trying to improve your lifestyle as long as the new car payment is less than 10% of your gross monthly income. That way, it's still a purchase within reason, and you're not, stepping out of your means entirely just to afford a brand new car. The lifestyle inflation I'm referring to is those that spend way too much on a certain category to the point where they start living paycheck to paycheck again. All right, the number 2 strategy that we really want to figure out at the $100,000 salary level is to start targeting our financial independence number. There's a possibility that you will be able to retire early if you start making a really good income, as long as you have a really good savings rate. And so we want to figure out what steps we need to take in order to get there. So here's a great resource from networthify.com. That's where you can plug in your income and your savings rate to see how quickly you can retire. If you have a portfolio value of $250,000, you make $100,000 per year, and you save 20% of your income, you could retire in 19.5 years. Now, if your savings rate was 30%, you could possibly do it in 15.9 years. This is the primary strategy of the FIRE community, and that's a community of people that are trying to retire as early as possible. Their main plan is usually to aim to save at least 30, 50, or even 70% of their income. By being extremely frugal and essentially sacrificing their short-term pleasure, they're trying to get to their financial independence number as quickly as possible. Now, do you have to do this? I would argue probably not, but it might be a lifestyle you may want to go after, especially if you start to make more income. The third strategy at the $100,000 income level is to really start thinking about how can we get more gains from our investments across the board. This is going to be a little bit of a hot take and not the usual buy index fund strategy that we usually talk about on this channel. But when you start making more of an income, let's say you make 150K, 200K, maybe 300K and even more, that's when you can start to take some shots at higher conviction plays to try to grow your investment count as quickly as possible. Now, a huge disclaimer, this will come with a lot more risk, but also a lot more potential upside. And for 95% of people out there, this strategy is not for them, but this is what I would do if you already make a lot of money. I'd first decide how much percentage of my total portfolio that I'm willing to risk into higher, riskier plays. Maybe you decide that's 5%, 7%, or maybe 10% of your portfolio that you go ahead and risk and put it into some sort of higher conviction play, because the more concentrated you go into one position that actually does really well, then the more you're gonna make. There are real estate investment syndicates out there. You could also put that money into a certain company or a stock that you have higher conviction in, or you can just put it all on black. Just kidding about the black on roulette, do not do that, but you get the idea. Some of my biggest gains in my portfolio are from owning such stocks or funds that I've had higher conviction in. For example, Nvidia as of late, Meta stock, and even Bitcoin has been doing really well this year. For some of my friends, that is their real estate investments that have done really well for them in the past 5 years. This strategy definitely depends on your own risk tolerance, how much you can afford to lose when it doesn't work out, and the research that you ultimately do. When it comes to higher conviction plays, you need to have some sort of competitive edge when it comes to the knowledge that you might have about the certain industry that you're trying to invest in or the certain product that you're looking at. Ideally, when it comes to investing like this, you have that specific knowledge about whatever you're investing into. So that means if you're in semiconductors, probably don't invest in the retail sector. That's what you want to look for, which are the intersections of your knowledge and the investments that you can identify that other people can't. I'm going to reveal the Chinese secret to saving money. Now, I've gotten a lot of these money saving tips from my dad, who's your typical good with money Chinese person, and I want to share with you those today. People sometimes will ask me if I'm half Asian, but I'm actually 100% Chinese, and my mom is from Beijing. My dad is from Shanghai, and I've done many trips to China, including 2 6-month stretches, both in Hong Kong and in Beijing, and many trips in between. So sit back, 你好，我们现在开始这个节目吧. The most stunning fact about the Chinese is that in China, the gross savings rate there is 45.9% as of December 2021. That means on every $100 that they bring in, they're going to be saving roughly $46 of that. Contrast that to the United States, where we have a heavy focus on consumption in this country. Our savings rate is typically between 3.5 and 5% according to the data. So what's the reason for this big disparity? I mean, that's almost a factor of 10 that we're talking about here. So why are the Chinese so good at saving money? First, it's definitely cultural. Us as Americans, we're always being hit with sales, discounts, financing options, and the like.
80% off clothes. Come on in and I'll give you a free quote.
And we're always kind of pressured to keep up with our neighbors.
Is this car $15,000?
Yeah, it is now.
A lot of this originated after the post-World War II era. It was not long after the Great Depression, and it was deemed patriotic if you were actually to consume in America at that time, and so they were trying to spur the economy on.
And I encourage you all to go shopping more.
In China, it's very different. They have a heavy emphasis on saving money because of what money means to them, as well as the demographics of their country. You'll also find a heavy aversion to financing things in China. Oftentimes, Chinese people want to buy things full in cash instead of trying to finance it and take on debt. Now, if you're just looking for the Chinese secret to saving money, I'm gonna leave a timestamp down below so that you can just skip to it if you want. However, right now I'm gonna cover the why as to why Chinese people save money, because I think it's really interesting. And if you understand intrinsically why Chinese people want to save money, it can help you save money as well. So the first reason why Chinese people like to save money is the meaning of money and what it means to them. So as kids, you're taught from a very early age that saving money is honorable. Kids will often get money in these red envelopes for New Year's and birthdays, and they are often encouraged by their parents to save it. This money is referred to as lucky money. Now, money is so important to the Chinese that they even have a phrase during the holidays and New Year's that they say. Instead of Happy New Year, they say something else. Let's listen to Ronnie Chang, the comedian. You can also see the importance of money in the way that people in Chinese society treat other people with a lot of money. People with a lot of money in Chinese culture are deemed successful in many people's eyes, and so it's often viewed as a good thing to have a lot of money. Now, being successful also has its other perks in China, and that actually brings me to my next point, which is demographics. Up until 2016, China actually had a one-child policy that was implemented in the late 70s and early 80s to kind of stem overpopulation. And that means each family could have one child. Now, if you had more than one child, you would just be slapped with a fine. And in addition, if you didn't pay that fine, your household would not be able to register your second child's name in the household system. So your second child would not be eligible for healthcare services and other services like education. So naturally, this one-child policy created a sharp decline in newborns, as you can see by this graph, but also in sex-selective abortions. In China, it's usually much more important to have a boy than a girl because the boy usually inherits the family name as well as the property. So what you had was a lot of people kind of using contraception in a way that they would avoid female births and try to optimize for male births. And with that contraception, actually it skewed the population having more males than females over time. So at its worst, it was 122 males for every 100 females that were born. Now, in general terms, if you have more men than women, then you have a supply and demand issue, right? So there's more men chasing the same amount of women. So basically, to stand out as a man in China, you have to be viewed as successful, aka you probably have a lot of money. The other thing with the one-child policy was that since families were only having one child, they weren't having multiple kids in the majority of cases. That means that the parents could save more money because they didn't have multiple kids to feed. So you kind of had a double whammy with the one-child policy. You had parents not having to spend as much money, and then the males trying to save as much money to become desirable. Another reason for saving in China is that there's no 401k, there's no IRA, there's no retirement accounts that Chinese people can contribute to. Rather, they do have what's called a pension system, but still many people in China are wary that the pension system will still be around when they retire, and so they also worry about the costs of healthcare, education, and their own pensions. So these are some of the main intrinsic reasons as to why Chinese people like to save money, but let's actually talk about the money secret of this video. The main secret as to why Chinese people are brilliant at saving money, it's not anything crazy, it's just that they have every dollar accounted for. In my particular case, my dad would always know where his money was going at all times. And there is a special budgeting system that can help you with this. And in America and in the Western countries, it's called the zero-based budgeting system. The zero-based budgeting system is a method in which you budget where you spend every last cent of your monthly income so that your amount left at the end of every month is equal to zero. So that means your income minus your expenses equals zero at the end of the month. Now, expenses in this case also includes savings, investments, paying off debt, etc. Let's pretend you make $4,000 a month. A zero-based budget might look like the following. You have your rent, your groceries, your necessities all listed right here, but then you also have a section for the things that you're saving for. Your emergency fund, your IRA, your student loan payments, new car fund, and then any other savings that you might want to do. You can see by the time that you get to the end of your budgeting, you are left with $0 at the bottom right here. This is essentially the zero-based budgeting system where all dollars are accounted for. You can easily do this budgeting system at home, but it also means that you have to be super honest with your own expenses. And sometimes you might have to do this for 3 months to get an average of all your variable expenses throughout the 3 months. If you've watched some of my videos before, you should know that this budgeting system doesn't exactly tell you how much you should spend for every single category. Rather, it kind of helps you understand your expenses as a whole, including your fixed expenses, and then you can kind of categorize your expenses and allocate your budget from there. All right, there are 4 main factors that the Chinese prioritize to help them save a lot of money that I want to tell you about. Before we do that though, make sure to drop this video a like, and if you enjoy economics and business content, I want you to check out my free newsletter called Hump Days. That comes out twice a week on Wednesdays and Sundays. It's completely free to sign up, and I will link it down below, and I hope to see you guys in the newsletter as well. All right, so the first of the 4 main factors that the Chinese do to help them save money is that they don't indulge in luxury goods or goods that are just there as status symbols. The majority of Chinese people want to stay humble, and they also want to fly under the radar, so they usually stay away from these luxury products. Number 2, when the Chinese earn money, they usually like to live off a very small percentage of their income. Now, my dad grew up with very little money as a child in Shanghai. There were some days that he could not even afford food, and he would go to sleep hungry. When he was able to afford food, all he could really buy at the time was a plain pastry called a mantou, and a mantou is a tasteless kind of white bun that you can buy for very cheap. Because of this tough childhood, when my dad started his career, whenever he earned, let's say $10, he tried to live off of $1 single dollar. Now, in reality, was he able to live off of $1 for every $10 that he earned? Not really. There were going to be times that he had to spend 6, 7, 8, or 9 out of those $10 just to make ends meet. For him though, saving money wasn't a way to build wealth. It was actually a way to ensure that he never had to sleep hungry again. So this simple principle of trying to save as much money as you can and live off of little as possible really stuck with me, and it's one of the main factors that I think many other Chinese people adopt as well. Now, this is a good rule if you're trying to build wealth, but please understand that this type of rule will create what's called a scarcity mindset about money. And so you kind of have to acknowledge that psychologically, that as you earn more money, you can kind of switch your mindset into more of an abundance mindset later later on. The third factor that the Chinese employ to save a lot of money is that they really focus on their needs versus their wants. So another wise lesson from them is that if you need something and you have to actually spend money on something you need, then go ahead and spend money, especially if it pertains to your health. So if you're debating between a flimsy desk chair or an ergonomic chair that might be able to make you more comfortable and stay healthier throughout the day, you might want to opt for that ergonomic chair. I would classify the ergonomic chair as a need within reason. Of course, you don't want to take this logic to the most extreme. For example, everyone needs clothes, but that doesn't mean you need to go buy Gucci clothes just because they are better because it's a need. So here, the idea is to be reasonable with your spending and make smart choices and save where you can. Now, when it comes to wants, you can still buy something that you want, but make sure that you're going to get really good value out of that. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you buy a $350 fancy wallet. Like, let's say you just really wanted this. Well, you want to make sure that you can use that wallet for a very long time so that it amortizes the cost of your use. Could you use that wallet for 5 years? Then that means you would take that $350 and spread it out over 5 years of usage. That comes out to less than 20 cents a day. Spending money is inevitable. Everybody will have to spend money at some point, but the lesson here is to be reasonable and frugal with most of your decisions. The last factor here is that if you're trying to save money very quickly, the Chinese would advise you to stay at home and eat at home.
No, we have food at home. Food at home.
I think this one is pretty universal to most cultures. We know that by eating out, we're spending a lot more money on food than we need to. And in my household, I remember growing up and we would maybe go out to eat once every other week. Usually having people over to have a group dinner was more of a commonplace. And so that was our way of socializing as a family growing up. And the eating out was just mostly saved for special occasions. There's one simple budgeting method that you need to get your finances in order, and I've been doing it close to a decade now, which is to run yourself like a business. In today's video, we're gonna discuss what that means, and I'm gonna share with you guys how you can do it with the exact budgeting method I'm gonna share with you today. Now, it's something I swear by because if you think about it, if you run yourself like a profitable business, what's gonna happen at the end of every month is you're gonna have leftover profit, AKA net profit, so that you can continue to run your business far into the future. Profitable businesses stay in business because they're consistently making more money than their expenditures. So step one in running your finances like a business is at least being aware of your personal finances. According to a psychology study from Rice University, being aware of your finances is one of the biggest reasons as to why people maintain and actually improve their personal finances. That's a shocker, I know, but just listen to this study. The professor conducted 3 different studies between the relationship of one's personal knowledge about their financial assets, liabilities, and spending patterns, and basically concluded that, quote, a higher degree of self-awareness about one's finances translates into feedback about past successes and failures with money, lower uncertainty about the strengths and weaknesses of the current finances, and clarity on how to move forward. Long story short, this should be no surprise to you, but the more that you pay attention to something, the better that you naturally get at it and the less uncertain you become. That is, unless you are me and you're trying to find a girlfriend, in which case more attention does not equal more success in that realm. And that's why I generally like to stick with finance, because the more that you pay attention to that, the generally better it becomes. On a more serious note, usually I have friends that come to me and they ask me, hey, how do I get better with managing my own personal finances? And I always issue them the exact same challenge. That's to track their income and expenses for at least 3 months close to the dollar. The ones that are actually successful in improving their finances are the ones that are able to stick to this challenge, and that they also check their bank account, their credit card statements, and their online accounts with a certain frequency. Usually the ones that are checking their accounts at least once a week or more are the ones that are generally better with their personal finances, and that kind of makes sense because you know exactly how you're doing on a given day. Now, I personally check my bank account every day or every other day, and that gives me a lot of peace of mind in how I'm actually doing with my personal financial life. In fact, if you've seen some of my other videos, you should know that I famously keep a financial master sheet where I tally up all my income and expenses at the end of every single month. So that's actually a huge reason as to why the last day of the month is so fun for me. Like, today's October 30th and tomorrow's gonna be October 31st, which is Halloween, yes, but it's also the end of the month when I get to tally my income and expenses. So what I really like to do is I like to grab a Diet Coke at the end of the night, and I just go through through all of my different accounts and just kind of log everything and see how everything has done over the course of the past month. And then I see how my progress has been since earlier this year. Is my net worth growing? Are my investments growing? Etc, etc. It's definitely one of my favorite days, and I literally salivate just thinking about how much fun I have at the end of the month. Now, some people don't really enjoy their finances to the extent that I do. Some of my friends who I issue that challenge to, the 3-month spending and tracking challenge, etc., they get pretty embarrassed if they spend $20 on their Pete's coffee or $100 on a designer t-shirt here and there, and they just generally are afraid of facing their finances. And that feeling of embarrassment around your finances is a very common feeling, and it actually might overwhelm you to the point where you're not able to actually track your expenses because of how guilty you feel about them. And if you're watching this video and you do exactly that, you just have to know that that's completely rooted in psychology, and there are a few ways to get around it. So one of the things that many people are afraid to face is their own financial reality, because confronting your financial reality can actually be a very scary thing. You might have 20K in debt, you might have student loans, you might have a high balance in your credit card, or perhaps a negative balance in your bank account, and you know that if you check your bank account, it's just literally going to be staring at you in the face. However, I think this is one of the best things that you can do, which is to confront your debt, confront the reality that you're facing right now, and you need to start tracking your progress from this point forward. You might be $25,000 in debt right now, and that's not going to feel really good, but if you start to track it now, I can guarantee that as you continue to track it over the next few months, as long as you're making some sort of progress, that's going to be super motivating for you to continue to move forward. I've been tracking every year for the past 6 to 7 years, and even at the beginning when I was making 30 to 40K a year, I realized that as long as I was making progress, I was on the right track. And it's really fun to see now, if I look back 6 years, like how I was doing back then, and just kind of like realize I've come a long way. And I think that by doing this tracking, you're gonna get like a journal entry of your finances, and that's gonna be really powerful for you, just building confidence as you move throughout life. So if you wanna be good at your finances as well, here's what I would do. There are 4 things that I would do. Number 1, I definitely start tracking your expenses here. This is going to be a pretty manual process. You can look at the last 3 months of your credit card statements and your bank statements and kind of get a running average of what you spend on each category. Number 2, I would start checking your online bank balances as well as your credit card balances at least once a week, if not more. Number 3, I would start a budget, and we're going to use the exact budgeting method that I use very shortly here. And number 4, I would learn to disassociate your spending from your identity. In the beginning, this last point is really tough, especially if you're aware and embarrassed of your current spend. However, if you practice the act of tracking your expenses as well as your income, what's going to happen is that you become more of an observer over time. You start to like observe how you're spending, but you're almost looking at it from a third party or a third person point of view. You're just being really objective with your own spending. It's kind of a hard feeling to articulate, but when I spend money, I almost don't think of it myself as spending money. I'm just looking at myself from a really far distance. Like if an alien was looking down on the world, looking at Humphrey and just seeing how much he was spending, I kind of look at it from an objective point of view. So when I spend some money, I don't really feel too bad of it. I'm just like, oh, cool, I spent $20 on Pete's coffee. Hopefully you get to a point where you have little to no emotion about your spending, and that way you can objectively look at your spending on a regular basis. All right, once you're feeling really aware of your finances, then that's when we can get into the budgeting method that changed my life, and I like to personally call it my life's P&L, or basically a profit and loss sheet. A P&L sheet is typically a statement that's used by a business to see how profitable they are on any given month. So here's what a sample one looks like right here. At the top, you can see that this business made $3,367 in sales for the month. Then you can see down below that they spend money on cost of goods, things like materials, importations, subcontractors, stock, and freight, for a total of $1,400. That left them a gross profit of $19.6720. However, they still had some other expenses like Tom's salary, Mary's salary, telephone, and stationery, which totaled $1,185, leaving them with a grand total net profit of $782.20 at the end of the month. So visually, this statement kind of works from top to bottom. At the top, you can see how much revenue they brought in, and then as you go down the P&L statement, you can see how much they spent on keeping their business going, aka their cost of goods sold. And then lastly, any other variable expenses were at the bottom. So having this profit of $782.20 at the end of the month in this business's case allows them to take this profit, and now they have a lot of flexibility on what they can do with it. They could reinvest in the business, or perhaps they could just take that money out and buy a PlayStation 4 with it. The idea here is that they have a leftover amount of profit every single month that they can use for the future. Now, how does this relate to us, or you and I? This is the exact method that changed my life. So let's actually look at the P&L sheet again and then just simplify it into 3 or 4 categories. Okay, so for our personal life profit and loss statement, we're gonna keep income at the top here the same. You probably make a salary or get paid, so you should know what that is on a monthly basis. For cost of goods sold, let's actually replace this with the category called fixed expenses. These are going to be the expenses that are required for your life. So for example, things like rent, insurance, transportation, healthcare, etc. For the expenses portion of this profit and loss statement, we're gonna replace this with discretionary expenses. So these are all of your optional expenses at the end of every month, things like eating out, shopping, entertainment, and your video game habit. And then lastly, net profit, we're just gonna keep that exactly the same. Now, if this looks confusing to you, don't worry. I'm gonna have an exact template that you can download in the description below. I've basically just recreated this profit and loss statement, but have them be empty cells so that you can fill it out with your own information. So this is the exact budgeting method we're gonna use. We're gonna create profit and loss statements for every single month that we exist, and then hopefully we have some net profit left over at the end of every month. This budgeting method is actually pretty similar to what's called the zero-based budgeting method, which is a pretty popular one among the personal finance community. Now in that method, what you're gonna have is you're gonna have your monthly income at the top, and then you list out all of your expenses, and ideally at the end of every month, you have $0 left so that every dollar is accounted for. However, in the P&L method, the difference is that you're gonna have some money left over at the end of every month, and with that leftover money, you can decide what you wanna do with it. You can either save it for big purchases, you can save for your retirement, or you could just keep them as flexible dollars that you're gonna use for the next month. The best part about doing these profit and loss statements, in my opinion, is that after 2, 3, or 4 months of data, what you're gonna have is you're gonna figure out how much you're average spending on every single category, and that way you can look at a category, perhaps like entertainment or shopping, and you can say, okay, am I spending too much money in this category, and kind of question and figure out if you can reduce or cut back on certain categories. Now, ideally in your own personal life's profit and loss statement, you have some net profit at the end of every single month. That's gonna allow us the flexibility to basically allocate that money and allocate that money strategically. So that's the next step we're gonna talk about, which is how should we allocate the net profit that we get every month? Now, if you guys do remember, I did make a video on the channel called the 7 places your money should go when you get paid. That's going to be a really super in-depth video about exactly how you should allocate your money every single time you do get paid. However, I'm gonna do a quick recap and a quick abridgment for this particular video. What we wanna be doing is that at the end of every month, we should have leftover money or net profit, and then we wanna take that money and strengthen our financial base. Once our financial bases are covered, that's when we wanna go after increasing our wealth. So in terms of our financial base, let's actually look at it this way. At the very bottom, you wanna at least make sure you're making minimum payments on your debt, such as your credit cards, your student loans, and your auto loans. The reason is that if you don't have this first level of bases covered, which is making the minimum payments on your debt, it could actually crumble the entire structure because your credit score could just be shot completely. Just missing one payment on a certain type of debt could tank your score up to 180 points, which is absolutely crazy because that's gonna hurt your future chances of perhaps financing a car or financing a house or financing whatever you want in your life. So when it comes to debt, we need to be perfect on making payments on that debt, but assuming that we have those covered, then the next level there is actually creating an emergency fund. I personally think that you should have at least 6 months of living expenses saved up in an emergency fund. So that means if you spend $2,000 a month on your living expenses, you should have at least $12,000 saved up. Make sure you set that aside in a high yield savings account because $12,000 at the risk-free 4 to 4.5% that you can get right now because of the interest rates, it's at least an extra $500 per year. If you are looking for resources for a high yield account, I'll link some down below so that you guys have that there as well. All right, so after those 2 foundational levels are covered, I think there are 2 different ways that you can go, and I think these are pretty interchangeable. The first is that you can pay off all of your existing debts except for your mortgage. You can exclude that one. Now, if you do this, it will allow you to live mostly a debt-free lifestyle and give you a lot of peace of mind and flexibility. The second option is you start to contribute to your retirement accounts, such as your Roth IRA, your 401ks of the world. Of these 2 options, I think that number 1, paying off your debt will strengthen your financial foundation versus number 2, contributing to your retirement funds and then investing it will try to increase your wealth over time. This is kind of where it gets a little bit tricky in terms of allocating your money. I don't really know which one is the right one for you specifically. specifically because everyone's situation is a little different. Now, personally, if you were to ask me, I would try to pay off all of my debt, including my student loan debt, as well as my credit cards. And then the last debt that I might exclude is the mortgage, but it just definitely depends on your interest rate. Okay, if you've made it that far, which is hopefully you have your financial foundation covered, perhaps you're contributing to retirement, then the next thing that you can do is to invest in a taxable account. And in a taxable account, you're just trying to optimize for the best compounding possible and trying to increase your net worth. You might acquire assets like real estate or perhaps alternative investments, but the key here is to invest in things that you deeply understand and don't just invest in things because your friends tell you to. Whatever it is, make sure you have a method for tracking your investments and how well they're doing over time, because that will make you a better investor over the long run. Now, a lot of people won't even get into the acquiring assets part of their life because they are still stuck in the financial foundation section because of their poor money management skills. However, if you start running yourself like a business, I can at least guarantee that you're going to see some progress in your financial life. You're going to be able to confront the financial reality that you might be in. And that's all that really matters, is that as long as you're making progress towards your financial goals, that's going to be a win. We're going to talk about the best wealth building strategies for every decade in adulthood, and let's waste no time at all and get straight into it, starting in our 20s. The 20s is going to be the first decade in which you start earning money, and it's a time that you want to start building a good financial foundation for your future. And the first wealth strategy when it comes to that is to start cleaning up your personal finance hygiene. Just like brushing your teeth and flossing every day, there are a few financial steps that we can take to ensure that our financial foundation and our hygiene is clean when it comes to personal finance. So within this strategy, there are 3 sub-steps, and the first is to avoid consumer debt at all costs. By having consumer debt in your 20s, you're compounding your problems early on, because when you're in your 20s, you're not making that much money, and so we don't really want to have consumer debt adding a layer of complexity into that. Typical consumer debt interest rates are 18% per year, and credit card debt by age in your 20s on average is around $2,900 to $3,000 in the United States. So step 1 is to stay away from it at all costs, or if you have to have some in your 20s, try to pay it off as soon as you can. The second personal finance hygiene tip I have for you guys is to maintain a budget. On an average month, you should know how much you are making versus how much you are spending, and ideally you are running a profit. If you're spending more than you make, then you're not really operating with a margin of safety, and just like any business, if you're spending more than you make, then you are losing money, and that is not good. We want to be sure that we're like profitable businesses and actually operating with a profit so that we have that margin of safety, and that margin can be used to save, and it can also be used to invest and grow our wealth. An easy way to do this is to look at your past 3 months of credit card statements and bank statements, add them all together in a Google Sheet or something similar to that, and just try to figure out your average spend per category. This might take you an afternoon to do, but it's something that I recommend to all of my friends, and I consider you my friend, so please do this, because by taking this time to do that, you will understand your own budget so much more. The last personal finance hygiene tip that I have for you guys is to start saving for emergencies. So if you've watched this channel, you should know that you should have 3 months worth of emergency fund expenses saved up. So whatever your monthly expenses are, multiply that by 3. That's how much you should have saved and set away. Once you have those 3 fundamentals of hygiene down, the next wealth building strategy in your 20s is going to be, drumroll please, earn money. I hate to say it, but in your 20s, you actually have to go out and earn some money. You're not going to get rich just daydreaming and lounging around your house. It's imperative in your 20s that you start building some skills and try to find a job that actually starts paying you for either your time or your skills. Ideally though, you want to get to a place where your job is not paying you directly tied to the hours that you're working, because the universal truth is that we all have 24 hours in a day. If you're working a job that's directly tied to the number of hours that you're working, it's going to be really hard to build wealth over time because you're naturally limited by the amount of hours that you can work. In your 20s, I definitely think it's still okay to trade time for money. In fact, it's probably a great idea, especially if you're getting a lot of experience, but eventually you want to start to identify opportunities where you can get paid based on results or based on the equity that you might receive by working that job. With the jobs that are results-based, if you're good at what you do, then your potential to earn is going to be much, much higher. In terms of jobs that pay you in equity, if you think about it, stock options are a form of equity. So all those people that are getting filthy rich by working for Nvidia, they technically are still trading their time for money, but because of the equity and stock options that they have, they are much better off. They still get a lot of upside that's uncorrelated to the time that they're putting in because of the stock options and their current value. I'd argue that you can still get wealthy by trading time for money as long as your job still offers you some sort of leverage as part of the compensation plan, like in the Nvidia example. Wealth strategy number 3 in your 20s is to start contributing to your retirement accounts and also try to max them out if possible. The order in which you should contribute to them is as follows. So first, you want to get the employer match for your 401k or 403b if it's offered. Second, you want to contribute to your Roth IRA or traditional IRA. And then finally, at the end, you can go back to the 401k or you can go straight into taxable investing. The main reason this order exists is that it tries to get you the most ROI for your money up front. So with the 401k match, you get free money from your employer because they're matching your contribution. And then with the Roth IRA, you're also getting some free money in the future because of the tax sheltered gains that you're going to have. Because all the gains in a Roth IRA are tax-free by the time you retire, if you start one in your 20s, you're going to give yourself the most time to compound that wealth. Now, if you're under the age of 50, you can contribute $7,000 per year into your Roth IRA as of 2024. And if you're over the age of 50, you can contribute $8,000 per year. Lastly, after the 401k match and the Roth IRA, you can do some taxable investing. And in terms of what to invest in, I have many videos on that as well. The short of it though is that you can always invest in an S&P 500 index fund or an index fund that tracks the market like VTI. And on average, these typically return around 8 to 10% per year. That means if you were to invest about $5,000 per year into these index funds, by the time you retire with compound returns, your money could well be worth over 7 figures. That's one of the most common and proven strategies to build wealth. And when you're in your 20s, you want to take advantage of the time you have left before retirement, which is a ton of time. All right, let's get into the strategies for your 30s now. I think this is going to be really interesting for you guys. If you haven't already completed the wealth building strategies in the decade of the 20s, you want to make sure you do that. But the first wealth building strategy in your 30s is going to be doubling down on your skills and trying to complement those skills as well. When it comes to really skyrocketing your income, this is how that strategy could play out. So pretend you've been working in marketing for 7 years at the best advertising agency in the country, and then all of a sudden you join a startup selling, let's say, bottled water. You may already understand some of the best strategies of marketing, like trying to narrow down your audience, creating copy that speaks directly to that audience, and then also cultivating your brand's look and feel. You may even have existing knowledge about how your prior advertising agency would have tackled this marketing challenge, which is how do you even differentiate bottled water? Your marketing knowledge as well as your advertising experience is already translating to a lot more revenue for the startup, and so that's getting you paid more handsomely. But if you really wanted to double down on this skill, you could pursue something like extra studies in psychology. If you're taking some after work classes in psychology, what you're essentially doing is you're complementing your main competency of marketing, you're adding fuel to that fire, and all of a sudden, if you can understand how marketing psychology works, you can make even more money for this startup. In your 30s, that's what you want to be doing. You want to identify skills that you were good at, identify complementary skills that can add to your main competency, and therefore translate to way more money for you in the long run. The second wealth building strategy in your 30s is going to be diversifying your income streams or diversifying your asset holdings. According to the author of Rich Habits, 65% of millionaires usually have 3 or more income streams, and 45% had 4, and 29% had 5 or more. So here's a list of income sources that you can go after on the screen. I'll just leave them up on the screen right now. I'm not going to read all of them, but the idea here is that if you're just still relying on one income stream in your 30s, you want to try to add one additional one. So let's say you already have earned income. If you're able to add some sort of side hustle income or even rental income, that's going to fast track your way to even more wealth. You can also diversify asset classes. So let's say in your 20s, you're primarily invested into stocks. Perhaps in your 30s, you can add some real estate. Diversification can not only help you preserve capital, but it can also help you build wealth when you have 2 uncorrelated asset classes that both do well. So in our example, if you had real estate and stocks, these markets don't often move with each other and therefore could be a really great way to balance out your portfolio. The third wealth building strategy in your 30s is to keep your lifestyle inflation in check. So in your 30s, you're going to be earning way more money, and the quickest way to sabotage that is with lifestyle inflation. One of the lessons of the book, The Millionaire Next Door, is that the greatest accumulators of wealth are often the ones that play the best defense, which means that they always live within their means. They keep their lifestyles cheap and modest even while their incomes increase. The book goes on to illustrate that those people that often look really wealthy are often the ones that are most deeply in debt. So lawyers and doctors, for example, they earn a way above average income, but because of that, they always want to live in the similar neighborhood that their colleagues do, and they also want to drive Porsches and Ferraris that their colleagues do as well. Because of this, they might even struggle to pay off some of their debts, including student loans, mortgages, as well as their car payments. The authors of the book found that by studying many millionaires, the ones that actually accumulated their wealth the fastest were the ones that kept their spending habits the same while their incomes increased. So I have a friend, he's not a doctor, but he makes around $750,000 per year, which is an astronomical amount of money. I think that puts him in the top 0.5% in the United States. But guess what? He has $50,000 in his savings account, saves less than $20,000 per year, has a 30-year mortgage that's a little bit too expensive for what he makes and also has a bunch of cars. Essentially, he just spends money like it grows on trees, he lives lavishly, and he's actually gotten used to this lifestyle. When I ask him if he wants to cut back on his spending, he doesn't really say that he wants to because he's gotten used to his life now. So I ask you, does making 700K or 800K a year even matter? If you're only saving 20K of it, I would argue that you can do the same thing on a 60K salary. What really matters is that you have a high effective savings rate, and that is what's going to really build your wealth and compound it very quickly. All right, let's talk about some of the best wealth strategies in your 40s, the decade of the 40s now. Your life is way more established, you probably have some kids, and you probably have a home mortgage. The first wealth strategy at this age is going to be reduce taxes as much as you legally can. I think more often than not, we're all focused on making way more money, but in your 40s, if you start to feel like you're getting capped out on your salary or you're getting close to the ceiling of your salary, then it really could make sense to start focusing on the other side of the equation, which is reducing your taxes. There are many ways to reduce your taxes, but I'm going to talk about the three biggest ones in my opinion, and the first one is going to be at the very minimum to max out your retirement accounts. For most people, if they have a 401k and an IRA combined together, that's around $30,000 to $31,000 in contributions every single year, that can be tax deductible. Now, if you have a Roth version, you don't necessarily take the tax deductible in that year currently. However, in the future, that's sheltering yourself from future taxes, which I would argue is just as good as well. The second step is to get a health savings account. So an HSA actually reduces the taxable income that you have for that year as well. And these are savings accounts that are dedicated to health related expenses. So you put money in it, and whatever you spend money on, let's say something doctor related or injury related, then that money is pre-tax. The last thing is that you can also invest money in your HSA. So I think that's another great advantage. I don't really talk about the HSA enough on this channel, but it offers a triple tax advantage. The contributions are tax deductible, the earnings are tax free, and any withdrawals for health related expenses are tax free as well. The third strategy for reducing your taxes is to try to take advantage of as many write-offs as you possibly can. So here's a full list of them on the IRS's website, but for example, if you have a business use for your car or your home, you could possibly deduct that. Or if you have student loan interest or even mortgage interest, you could start to itemize that and do an itemized deduction instead. While this video isn't a tax video entirely, I think it's worth talking to a tax professional or really making sure you take the time to research this, because if you're able to reduce your taxes, that's going to be a really powerful wealth building tool. All right, wealth strategy number 2 in your 40s is going to be to know your retirement number according to the 4% rule. True wealth is being able to retire and not have to worry about how much money you need to spend on everyday expenses. And in order to do that, we actually need to know what our exact retirement number is, our magic number. And the way that we can get there is by working backwards. For the FIRE community, that number is generally 25 times your annual expenses expected in retirement. So if you expect to spend, let's say $50,000 a year, then you need 50,000 times 25 or $1.25 million of a nest egg to retire comfortably. That's based on the 4% rule. And if you are unfamiliar with the 4% rule, that's essentially a rule that states that you can withdraw 4% of your nest egg in perpetuity in retirement. The assumption is that as long as your portfolio is evenly split between 50% stocks and 50% bonds, even in the worst stretches of the stock market history, you will not run out of money in retirement. If you are interested in learning how to figure out your retirement number or the 4% rule, I have many dedicated videos on this channel for those topics specifically, so I will link those down below in the description, and so you can check that out after this video. Wealth strategy number 3 in your 40s is to manage your risk appropriately. In your 40s, I think it's a really good time to have that check-in with yourself or even a financial professional to see how far off you are from that retirement number, check how your nest egg is doing, and actually figuring out if your risk even aligns with your goals. Also, for example, if you're feeling behind in your 40s, this can be a really good time for a wake-up call, because even in your 40s, if you save 25% of your income, you can still hit retirement freedom or financial freedom by the time you're 65 or 66. It does require aggressive saving, but it is still possible even in your 40s, so that is something that I want to share with you guys if you are feeling a little bit behind in your 40s. If you are ahead in your 40s, this is still a really good time to make sure you're having a check-in with yourself, making sure investments are actually aligning with your risk tolerance. This could also be a good time to pay off your mortgage early, especially depending on the interest rate of your mortgage, or if you just really want that peace of mind. In any case, this wealth building strategy strategy number 3 of your 40s is all about having this check-in with yourself, making sure your goals and your risk tolerance are still aligned, and if you really need to talk to a financial professional, you do so. So far in this video, we've gone over 9 wealth building strategies. If you are enjoying the video so far, make sure to drop a subscribe on this channel so that you can get more content like this from me in the future. Let's get into the last section of the video now, and I've actually combined the last 2 decades, which is the 50s and the 60s of your life. I've combined these 2 decades because by the time you hit the age of 50, what you should be really focusing on is the meticulous planning of your retirement and beyond. There are still going to be some ways to maximize our wealth in these decades, but still, let's go over wealth strategy number 1 in your 50s, and that is to protect capital above all else. Now note, this does not mean selling everything prematurely or selling everything emotionally as well, but let me explain. The best way to understand this is through The Millionaire Next Door, again, one of my favorite books. So 95% of Americans, according to the book, that had a net worth of $1 million or more in 1990 were regular people who built wealth through a consistent foundational lifestyle. They protect their capital first and foremost by not taking dumb risks, especially as they get closer to retirement. So when they're in their 50s and their 60s, they're not going all in on Dogecoin. Second, they start to shift some of their assets towards more fixed income and bonds as they near retirement age because the returns are much more predictable. And third, they figure out strategic ways to spend less money. That means actionable items like planning the year ahead, setting a budget, and cutting back on certain categories where they think they're spending too much. They also don't panic sell because all the gains when it comes to compound interest are at the end, and it's likely by the time that you're about to retire, your portfolio balance is quite high. Wealth accumulation is disproportionately a lot slower in the beginning when you're starting to build your wealth, but towards the end of the compound interest graph is where all the gains are, so you don't want to kill your gains or shoot yourself in the foot by selling too early or selling emotionally whenever the market is having turmoil or turbulence. Now, while you don't want to panic sell, the second wealth strategy in your 50s and 60s is to actually look for opportune times to sell big assets. So nobody can time the market perfectly, but let's say you're within the next 5 to 10 years, you want to retire and you have a house that you want to sell. You might actually want to wait till there's a seller's market within real estate to sell your home, because the way that real estate works is there's always going to be buyer's markets and then seller's markets, and this cycle continues on and on. The idea is that we just want to be selling our assets closer to the tops of cycles rather than the bottom of cycles when things aren't really looking that good. When it comes to stocks, it's really tough to time the market when it comes to your portfolio and retirement, but the idea is that if you're happy with the gains that you have in your portfolio and you're nearing retirement age, that might be a good time to take those gains. Or at the end of the day, if your retirement portfolio hits that number that you need to hit in order to retire comfortably for the rest of your life, maybe you just take it and run. Because by that point, the balance has served its purpose. You can take your gains for the purpose of retirement and not have to worry anymore. Now, of course, some people may just want to stay invested and withdraw small chunks from their portfolio as they continue to invest in the stock market. That's fine as well. It just depends on your own risk tolerance. Wealth strategy number 3 during these decades of your 50s and 60s is going to be estate planning, forming trusts, and figuring out your inheritance. Essentially, these are all strategies that will help you preserve wealth, not only for you, but your future generations. Proper estate planning, for example, can minimize gift taxes, inheritance taxes, as well as estate taxes so that your heirs can keep more of that money. The major components of an estate plan are documents like the living trust and the healthcare power of attorney form. Both of these documents will state your preferences in case something were to happen to you. And in terms of trusts, living trusts are good because you can put assets within the living trust and they can help you reduce your taxes when it comes to estate taxes or gift taxes. A lot of these aren't as hard to set up as you might think. You can find basic templates online, fill in your information, and then you just need to take it to a notary to get it officially notarized. Of course, if you have a complicated situation, you might want to consult a legal professional, but either way, having something basic and at least there is better than nothing. I wanted to give you a complete step-by-step guide on how I would go about getting wealthy, starting with zero money to start. Because I recently read a news article that said, quote, nearly half of Americans have less than $500 in their savings accounts, and about 29% of the respondents had between $501 and $5,000. This is leading to nearly 1 in 4 US adults saying that they have no emergency savings at all. So in order to change that narrative, I think if we focus on the fundamentals of building wealth, that anybody can become wealthy starting from scratch. And so let's actually start with step 1. So you're actually gonna have to go go out there and figure out ways to make money. Now, when it comes to making money, what you're trying to actually do is just transfer value from yourself to one other person or multiple people. For example, if you mow lawns, you're translating your value of mowing lawns into a service, and someone is paying you for that service so that they don't have to do it themselves. Or if you're an expert tennis player and you're teaching someone to play tennis, that's another type of transfer of value that people are willing to pay for. The good news is that becoming wealthy on a low salary is actually quite possible, and I'll show you guys how to do that later on in this video. But for now, the most important thing that we need to realize is that we need to earn some income. Now, there are some jobs that lend itself better to that than others. Jobs that I love in particular are ones where your inputs do not match your outputs. The easiest jobs that have this criteria, for example, are usually sales jobs. So these are jobs where you make a percentage of the deal that you actually close. Real estate jobs, private equity jobs, or even owning a small piece of a business that cash flows are all these types of jobs. For example, if you're a realtor and you get a net 3% commission on any sale that you do, then if you sell a $100,000 house, that's $3,000 in commissions. But all of a sudden, if you sell a home worth $1 million, then your commissions are now $30,000. The amount of work that goes into selling the $100,000 house and $1 million house are likely quite similar, but the idea is that your result is very different based on the size of the house or the value of the house that you close. That's why some of the most highest paid realtors are going to go to the most competitive regions of the entire United States. So people in California or New York or perhaps even Honolulu. They know that if they're able to just sell 1 or 2 houses, that could actually be an entire year's worth of salary, especially when you consider the homes in California being close to $3, $4, or $5 million in some regions. There is a downside though, which is when you are working these sales jobs, you are really relying on those 1 or 2 sales per year or however often that you're getting them. And if you don't get those deals for quite a while, then that could add a lot of stress into your life. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to go get a results-based job. In fact, most people won't even have that type of job, and most people probably don't even want that type of stress. And that's okay too, because you get a lot of advantages of having a steady job at a reliable company, including the steady pay as well as really great benefits. I think with any job, you can still get wealthy by investing the difference of what you make versus what you spend overall. Now, typically, if you're first starting out, I think you should have a few investing and savings goals. The first is obviously 10K, but then the second one is definitely that $100,000 milestone. And I think the best way to get to the $100,000 milestone is by being frugal on your way there. You don't have to be frugal forever, but I do think that in the beginning, we should be thinking critically about our money decisions, no matter how small they seem. Here's a prime example of saving money on a really small decision. So for example, I have the McDonald's app on my phone, and I can get an iced coffee with the McDonald's app for 99 cents, no matter the size. The normal price of that iced coffee might be $2.29. So by using the app, I save about $1.30. And while the $1.30 is not going to change my life drastically in any way, what I actually find is that $1.30 financial decision right there, it's a microcosm of all the other financial decisions that I'm going to be making in my life. I'm personally always trying to get the best deal that I can, and I think that especially early on when you're trying to save your way up to $100,000, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in this video, every little decision and every dollar that you save is going to matter way more. Now, by the way, with this extra difference in savings because you're hopefully being frugal, then the next step is to invest it. By investing as early as possible, you give your portfolio time to compound and grow, and in my opinion, there are 2 big reasons why you want to invest your money. The first is inflation. The Federal Reserve targets a 2% inflation rate for a healthy, growing economy, but as you may know, as of recent, that's been close to 3 or 5 or even upwards of 6%. That means if your money isn't earning at least 3, 5, or 6%, then your money is just actually losing value by sitting in an account. The second, more important reason why I think we should be investing is that because you want your money to actually start working for you. Let's pretend for a second that someone gave you $1 million and you want to live off of that $1 million for the rest of your life. If you put it all in a Chase savings account or one of these big bank savings accounts that pays you 0.01%, that's only $100 per year. Your $1 million in this case is not working very hard for you. Now imagine you had $1 million earning you 10% per year. That's an extra $100,000 per year on your initial $1 million. That's much more feasible, and that's why we actually want to invest our money, because if we can get at least 5 to 10% in the market on our principal balance, then we can actually possibly live off of it if our balance is big enough. The thing about investing our money is that our money will continually work for us as long as our original balance gets bigger and bigger. That's why a dollar invested today at an average return of 8% in the market, for example, is worth close to $22 in 40 years. And the idea here is that if your money is worth more in the future as long as you invest it, as long as you can beat inflation, then you're going to be growing your overall wealth over time. So because a dollar invested today could be worth $22 in 40 years, there's a third concept that you must understand. And that is losing money or making dumb plays with your money early on is going to kill your progress when it comes to trying to hit these financial milestones like $100,000 in net worth. So many people feel like that when their bank balance is really low or their net worth is close to zero, that there's no point in trying to save and they just doom spend instead. Like this article from Fortune that says Gen Z are so annoyed they can't get on the housing market that they're doom spending on nice things to make them feel like grown-ups. Basically, the article says that a lot of people are stressed out about buying a home or the possibility of never being able to own a home, so instead they're just doom spending and spending right now and splurging on things in the moment. I can definitely understand this sentiment as everything is getting a lot more expensive, but this is not the mindset that we want to have when we're trying to grow our wealth. So I talked about this a little bit earlier and also in my video about why your net worth explodes after 100K, but the idea here is that when you're starting with zero, every single dollar matters so much more. So let's look at a compound interest graph of your first 100K. Now, if you save 10K per year at an average return of 7%, it's going to take you 7.84 years to get to your first 100K. But as you can see towards the end of this graph, from 900K to $1 million, it only takes you 1.35 years. That means the first 100K in this case would have been the equivalent of 25.5% of the total amount of time that it took to get to $1 million, and the remaining 900K would take 74.5% of the time. That means your wealth accumulation is going to be disproportionately a lot slower in the beginning. So that means if your net worth is currently under $100,000, every dollar that you squander away, spend frivolously, or buy lottery tickets, or maybe sports gamble with, that's actually going to hurt your overall chances at building wealth as quickly as possible. Step 4 is to find ways to get multiple sources of income. According to Tom Corley, the author of Rich Habits, over 65% of millionaires usually had 3 or more income streams, 45% of them had 4 or more, and then 29% had 5 or more. So if we're able to create multiple income streams coming in, we're gonna have a diversified mix of how we make money. According to studies, here are the most common sources of income, starting with number 1, earned income. Earned income is usually just your primary job, so you either work for somebody else or you work for yourself, but it's the primary way that you generally generate income so that you have some money left over in order to kind of invest it and do other flexible things with it. And one of those flexible things could be other income sources, and so therefore we need one reliable income source in order to get this whole flywheel started. Another form of income is investment income, so this is going to be the money that we earn possibly from dividends from holding different types of underlying assets like stocks or index funds. These, in my opinion, are one of the most passive forms of income because as long as you hold the underlying asset, such as a stock, then you're going to get paid dividends just for holding that stock. Now, when it comes to this income source, pretty much anybody watching this video right now can get started with this income source right away by just opening a brokerage account and then investing that money in a dividend paying stock. I have a full video on my favorite dividend stocks that I will put down in the description below, but if you're curious, one of my favorite stocks of all time is JP Morgan because it pays a nice 2% dividend, as well as you can get some capital appreciation on the gain of the stock itself. Now, a 2% dividend is not that high of a dividend yield. You're gonna need a lot of the stock in order to get a nice healthy dividend income from it, but the idea is that it's at least passive. The more interesting thing with dividend stocks is that you have that potential for that capital appreciation as I was talking about earlier, and so therefore if you make a big gain on the stock value itself, that's called a capital gain, and that's another source of income. Capital gains are also known when you buy and sell a house and you make some money on the appreciation of your house. That's also a capital gain. So I would actually call a capital gain an unofficial type of income because you're really not actively trying to rely on a capital gain. It's just a very nice thing to have, especially if the asset that you own goes up in value. Number 3 is rental income. So if you own any type of rental property, perhaps you own a room in your house that you can rent out, or perhaps a car, then you can get rental income. Oftentimes millionaires will own rental properties because not only do they get that rental income, but they can also depreciate their real estate against their taxes, as well as the fact that they might get some capital appreciation for owning that rental property in the first place. The 4th source of income is interest income. So this is going to be the income that you get from holding your cash in, let's say, a high yield savings account. Right now, a lot of the accounts out there are paying between 4.5 and 5% interest on your money every single year. So that means on a $10,000 deposit, you're gaining at least $500 in interest income every single year. Compare that to a traditional bank like we talked about earlier that pays you 0.01% on your money, then you can actually just see that this is a no-brainer to save some money in your high yield savings account. And most of these savings accounts are FDIC insured these days, more than the standard $250,000. I personally like Wealthfront, Amex Savings, SoFi, and many more, and I will link some of my favorite high yield savings accounts down below in the description. Just know that interest income is in fact taxable, so every single year you will have to pay taxes on any interest income that you receive. The next income source that millionaires typically have is a side hustle, a side business, or just a second job. So millionaires usually have their primary income source, yes, but they often will have a second type of hustle or entrepreneurial activity that they're working on that could eventually become their primary income. So I personally noticed that reading reports about millionaires, as well as knowing some of them, that they often like to try different types of things. Take Graham Stephan, for example. He used to be a realtor that was just primarily working on residential real estate, but in his off times, he liked to make YouTube videos. And Graham kept making YouTube videos on the side, and eventually his YouTube income would replace his real estate income. Nowadays, he's a full-time YouTuber, podcaster, and he's just really made a great name for himself in the YouTube space, and I'm sure you guys have probably seen his videos. All right, so now that we have a blueprint for wealth in addition to all the income sources, let's actually talk about how you can build wealth on a lower salary. The average annual salary in the United States is $59,000. But let's actually use a more conservative $40,000 for this example. So at the $40,000 income level, you're taking home $26.96 per month. If you're able to save 10% of that into a Roth IRA, that's $269 per month that can compound for you over time, and then you can just invest it in the S&P 500, averaging about 8% returns. Let's also say you pick up a side hustle making about $125 per week. I think that's completely reasonable. That adds up to another $500 per month. That'll bring the total that you can invest up to $769 per month, or about $9,228 per year every single year. Now, this also doesn't include any increase in your salary, any cost reductions in your spending, as well as any bonuses that you might get. So if we assume that we're just staying at this $40,000 income level, after 20 years of investing like this, you could see a future balance of $456,000. After 25 years, that balance would get up to $728,000, and then in 30 years, you could be over $1.1 million easily. The idea here is that it does take a very long time. Yes, I'm definitely not saying that it's going to be really fast. However, if you have a modest salary, you can actually get there with discipline, savings, and a little bit of side hustles. I am sharing so many ways to build your net worth fast in 2026. According to a poll on my channel, the #1 financial goal the majority of you guys wanted to accomplish this year is increasing your net worth. So I'm confident today that if you're able to even implement just one of these strategies, your net worth will grow. So let's get into #1 today, which I call the 1% rule. One of the fastest ways to build your net worth is simply to reduce the amount that you spend on discretionary purchases, and this is where the 1% rule comes in. It states that you should think twice about any discretionary purchase that is more than 1% of your net worth. So if your net worth is $20,000, you want to think twice before making any purchase that is around $200 or more. If your net worth is $50,000, then any purchase that is $500 or more, you should think twice about, and so on. The less money you spend on discretionary purchases, the more that you can add to your investments to actually grow your net worth fast. If you have a net worth of $20K and you make a $200 purchase, or 1% of your net worth every single month, that's the equivalent of $2,400 per year, but on a yearly basis of your net worth, that's 12% of your net worth. This same habit over the course of 40 years could cost you $671,474 over the course of your entire career, and I think that's pretty crazy. This 1% rule is important when you're under $100,000 in net worth because, as you know, most of the friction in building your net worth is going to be at the beginning of your journey. Eventually, as your net worth passes $100,000 or $200,000, we can relax this rule a little bit and spend a little bit more freely. But hopefully by the time you reach 100K, you will have ingrained a habit of really thinking twice before any big purchase. In general, I like to wait a week or even up to a month before committing to a big purchase because time will really reveal to me if I really want that prospective item or not. The second way to build your net worth fast today is to disconnect your time from your earnings. If you really want to increase your net worth a lot this year, try to pursue activities and careers that pay you based on how well you perform and not your time. So let's actually listen to this clip from Naval Ravikant and what he has to say.
the first thing, if you're going to make money, is that you're not going to get rich renting out your time. Even lawyers and doctors who are charging $300, $400, $500 an hour, they're not getting rich because their lifestyle is slowly ramping up along with their income, and they're not saving enough. They just don't have that ability to retire. So the first thing you have to do is you have to own a piece of a business. You need to have equity, either as an owner, an investor, shareholder, or a brand that you're building that accrues to you to gain your financial freedom.
All right, so there are two things that Naval is saying here. The first is that you have to keep your lifestyle in check because he sees doctors and lawyers who are earning $300 to $500 an hour and actually not accumulating wealth. Now, this topic of avoiding lifestyle inflation and living below your means is one of our points for later on in this video, so we'll dive into that more a little bit later, so stick around for that. But the second argument that Naval points out is that in order to get wealthy and increase your net worth fast, you actually need to have some sort of equity, as he likes to call it. In other words, you won't get rich renting out your time. He says that you need to own a piece of a business, but I think that as long as you have a career or activity that pays you a percentage based on how big the deal or how successful you are is, then I think that's a really great way to grow your net worth very quickly. So just to give you an example, a realtor, they make commissions on real estate. So the more expensive of homes they sell, the more of a percentage that they take home. So often the work done to sell a multi-million-dollar house, say a $3 million house versus a $1 million house, is likely very similar, but the results are going to be vastly different for that realtor. The trade-off is often that these types of jobs require you to be intrinsically motivated, and that's not something everybody has. So you really have to know yourself in these situations and know if you can be a self-starter or not. You could theoretically still increase your net worth by working a high-paying job on an hourly basis, like being a doctor or a lawyer, but if you really want to increase your net worth fast, you're going to have to find a job that disconnects your earnings from your time. Method number 3 today is to invest any bonus or windfall money whenever it comes to you. So throughout life, for example, you will come across windfalls or bonuses. That could be at your job, you could get a bonus, you could get an inheritance, a tax refund, or through some stroke of luck, like the lottery, you might win a lump sum here and there. When these types of events happen, the best thing that you can do is to pretend that money was never there to begin with and just drop it all into investing. In practice, this is a lot easier said than done, and I would wager that 99% of people that get a bonus or a tax refund of $5,000, they'll want to spend some of it. So instead, I think a realistic go-to would be to take 10% of whatever windfall is coming your way and treat that as your fun spending money and then invest the remaining 90%. That way, at least you're benefiting from getting your bonus money. It's still a good compromise here because the majority of it is still going away towards your future self, but at least you get a little bit of money to play with. To illustrate how powerful this is, imagine you get a tax refund of $3,000 every single year and you're able to invest 90% of it, so $2,700. Over the course of even just 20 years, that can compound to an extra $133,000, all from being disciplined when you get that windfall. So make sure to do that, and let's move on to method number 4 today, which is to grow your income faster than expenses. This one might be a little bit too self-explanatory, but I think there are two main ways that you're going to build your net worth fast. Okay, so the first is to have a higher income while your expenses stay the exact same. Or number 2, you want to have the same income while your expenses go down. In both cases, you are increasing the gap between what you earn and what you spend. So there are actually 3 practical ways that you can do this today, and the first is going to be job hopping strategically. According to LendingTree, quote, when workers moved to larger companies, they saw the biggest pay increases. Those moving to a company with 500 plus employees saw an average salary increase of 15%, while those moving to a smaller company saw a 5 to 6% increase. In both cases, if you switch jobs, you seem to get an increase in your pay, and sometimes I think that if you stay at a company for too long, the pace at which your raises actually happen to you or occur to you slow down quite a bit. The problem is that companies aren't incentivized to pay you market rate once you're already there. So if you want to think about it from the company's perspective, you're already doing the work, you've already said yes to the salary, so why would they voluntarily give you a massive raise in order to match market rates? Now here's the thing, the market rate for your job could be 20 to 30% more than what you're making right now, and when they hire someone new, since there's no salary transparency these days in all of corporate America, you could have a situation where a new hire is making 20% more than you and you've been there already for, let's say, 5 years. This is why job hoppers often come out ahead financially, because when you interview for a new job, you're negotiating from a market rate and not your current salary. The second way you can increase the gap between your income and expenses is to aggressively cut the expenses side. This requires a little bit of tracking and planning, but if you can write down all the categories in which you spend money, assess where you're spending too much, and ruthlessly cut all of those expenses in that overinflated category, That is another great way to bring your expenses down while your income stays the exact same. And the third way is to build a high value skill in order to increase your income over time. These are going to be skills that directly increase and generate more revenue for your company, or skills that are in really high demand, but there aren't a lot of people doing them. I've seen people go from $60K a year to $120K a year by learning data analytics, or SQL, which is a programming language, in order to manipulate data. If you're a tradesman, you could increase your skills by learning to weld, HVAC, or even electrical work. And I've also seen people just have an incredibly lucrative side hustle by learning video editing or digital marketing. This is a little easier said than done, but if you're able to spend 6 to 12 months dedicating evenings and weekends to learning a high income skill, it's another great way to increase your income. All right, before we get into our fifth method today, I just really wanted to thank you guys for watching this far. It really means a lot to me and the team on this channel. So if you are enjoying these videos on this channel, make sure to subscribe. It's completely free and we would appreciate it. So thank you so much, and let's get into number 5. The fifth method to increase your net worth fast is simply by tracking it. 67% of Americans say they don't currently track their net worth, according to Credit Karma. And I think that being aware of your net worth is an easy win and easy way to grow it fast, because I find that the more energy and attention you put into your net worth, the more that it naturally grows. So to calculate your net worth, you just add up all your assets and then subtract any debts or liabilities, and boom, that is your net worth. I've personally created a net worth tracker that is free to download below in the description, and it's updated for 2026. It's definitely more robust, so make sure to check that out. I personally used to like tracking my net worth every month, but I found that that was maybe a little bit too often. So this year I plan on tracking it once per quarter, and I'll keep you guys updated on that progress. But the link for that spreadsheet will be down below. The sixth way to increase your net worth fast is to control your lifestyle velocity. So what does that actually mean? It means that when you have the momentum of increasing your income every single year, that's when it's very easy to increase your lifestyle and when you should keep it in check. Let me just list out a few crazy statistics of large expenses. Number 1, the total cost of owning and operating a new car is $11,577 from AAA. The average annual cost of owning and maintaining a home in the US is $21,400 in 2025, according to Bankrate. And the average cost of a vacation is now $7,249, according to travel insurance provider Squaremouth. And if you want to go overseas, make that $9,922. Lifestyle inflation occurs because as we make more money, we think that buying more goods and services are going to bring us more joy and happiness. But unfortunately, you may or may not know this already, what actually happens is that buying new things doesn't necessarily always increase your satisfaction and happiness in life. True fulfillment often comes from meaningful experiences rather than buying new things. So I would say focus on experiences, control your spending when it comes to your lifestyle, and delay status purchases as much as you can, and I think your net worth will thank you. Number 7 today is to maximize your tax efficiency. So this method is all about keeping significantly more of every dollar that you make without having to earn more money. There are 3 main ways to do this, in my opinion. So the first is to max out your 401k employer match and use your retirement accounts strategically. For 2026, the 401k limit is now $24,500 per year if you're under the age of 50, or $32,500 if you're 50 and older. For an IRA, it's $7,500 under the age of 50 and $8,600 per year over the age of 50. Contributing into a traditional retirement account is tax deferred, so that means it lowers your taxable income for the year that you contribute into them. The second strategy is to use the retirement accounts to actually shelter your investment gains from taxes as long as possible. Every time you realize a gain by selling a stock in a taxable brokerage account, you will have to trigger and pay capital gains taxes. But inside a 401k or IRA, you can buy, sell, and rebalance without any immediate tax consequences. And over time, this compounding can make a huge difference in your net worth. Also, you get some bonus points if you invest within a Roth IRA where the earnings grow tax-free. And the third method for tax efficiency is to tax loss harvest in your taxable accounts. If you have investments that are down in their positions, so as in they're negative, you can sell them to realize losses, and that can offset some of your realized gains. Then what you can do is just immediately buy a similar investment to maintain your market exposure and your asset allocation. And this strategy allows you to reduce your tax bill, thus saving you money overall and still increasing your net worth. So make sure to take advantage of the tax efficiencies allotted to you. And now moving on to number 8 today, negotiate everything. So I didn't know that you could do this, but you can negotiate for a lot more things than you think in life. I personally have a friend who used to take negotiating to the extreme and would try to negotiate at the butcher shop when he was buying steaks and fish. His rationale was, well, if they can't sell certain cuts of meat by a certain time, they'd probably rather discount them and sell them rather than having to throw them away. And to my surprise, it actually works for him at least some of the time, and that's what he told me anyway. Now, that's pretty extreme. We don't need to be negotiating on a New York strip at the butcher shop, but we can still be negotiating things like your salary, your utility bills, home repairs, wedding vendor costs, etc. There are two main things to know about negotiating though, which is number one, it is very, very uncomfortable, but it can be worth a lot of money. If you start a new job and negotiate your salary to be $5,000 higher than the initial offer they give you, and then you do nothing at all, but you get a 3% standard raise every single year, that one conversation was worth $59,000. And the second thing that you should know about negotiating is that negotiating for anything is done universally all the same way. You must figure out what you want, what you're willing to accept, and then figure out what you're gonna do if your negotiation fails. I'm gonna link this Reddit thread down below that teaches you exactly how to negotiate step by step, and it's definitely worth reading if you're thinking about negotiating for anything in life. Now, I've personally saved $600 to $1,000 per year just by making a few 15-minute phone calls to my different utility and insurance providers. In my case last year, it was on auto insurance, but you can also save money on other bills by calling companies and simply asking. A lot of companies will have retention departments whose entire job is to keep you as a customer, and they have discounts that they can offer, but you have to ask, and it costs you nothing to ask, so make sure you at least ask. Method number 9 today is to automate literally everything. Most people fail at growing their net worth because they make decisions too often. You can avoid all of this if you just literally automate everything. So set up automatic transfers so that when your paycheck hits your checking account, it gets automatically divvied up into other places that you might need it to go. Say you get paid twice a month and you want to save $500 per paycheck, you can set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your investment account for $500 on the day after each payday. That way, the money is gone before you have a chance to spend it on anything else. The psychology here is straightforward. You can't spend what you don't see, and you're not relying on discipline or remembering to invest every paycheck. It just happens automatically. Here are the top 5 things to automate in my opinion. It is going to be your utilities, your rent or mortgage payments, credit card bills, saving transfers, and investment contributions. Automate your money into those 5 buckets and then thank me later when your net worth has grown. And number 10 today is to increase your financial literacy. You can do this by watching guides on my channel, you could read books, you could listen to podcasts, or just go through any content that you can find on the subject of personal finance and investing. The ROI when it comes to increasing your financial literacy is essentially infinite because one good book or even one good habit that you learn from a book can snowball into good decisions, which snowballs into more wealth as time goes on. Financial literacy can compound better than money in my opinion because each concept that you learn will build on the previous one that you had before. If you understand compound interest, for example, this emphasizes starting early. Understanding tax efficiency means that you can structure your investments or your businesses better. And understanding psychology or the behavior of finance will help you with decision making in the long term. Most of this knowledge is free, and that's the beauty. You don't want to ever pay a boatload of money for financial education, as I learned a lot of what I know for free online. People that build wealth are just the ones who make better decisions with what they have. They aren't necessarily the ones who earn the most money. So I think invest in your financial education because it's the one investment that's guaranteed to pay dividends for the rest of your life. There's an ancient Chinese money rule that has been passed down from generation to generation, and it was only recently that I uncovered just how far it dates back. Now, this was a money tip that I learned from my dad, who was one of the main inspirations for me to start this channel in the first place, and I wanted to share this money tip with you today. Being a Chinese American, I feel like the values of saving and tracking my money have been passed down to me. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but it's true. And in this video, I want to reveal not only what the ancient money rule is, but how you can use it practically to save your first or maybe your next $10,000. According to CEIC macroeconomic data, China has a gross personal savings rate of 44.3% of GDP, nearly 2.5 times higher than the savings rates of both the United States and the United Kingdom. And while researching for this video, I discovered a publication from 1989 where the author details the historical Chinese accounting practices. By pure coincidence, there was a method within the paper that I unknowingly have been practicing since I was a teen, one that my family passed down. It's a technique called the 4-column accounting method, and this method that we're talking about today actually traces its origins back to the Tang dynasty, which reigned from 618 to 907 AD. That would make this money principle over 1400 years old. Now, if you're looking for just exactly how to use this 4-column method, I will leave a timestamp down below so you can just skip to it. But if you want to understand the exact reasons the Chinese are able to save so much and how you can save more money too, it's helpful to understand the why. Chinese people are, in my opinion, really good at saving money for a few key reasons. The first are Confucian values. So Confucius, if you've ever heard of him, was a Chinese philosopher who lived around 500 BC. He created a system of moral and social philosophies that became so influential that his teachings were actually adopted by the Chinese government for over 2,000 years. The core principles that he taught were number 1, frugality, number 2, self-discipline, and number 3, thinking long-term rather than seeking immediate gratification. And if you know anything about the traits of wealthy people, these are very similar traits that they also incorporate. These principles were literally taught in schools at the time. They were then positively enforced by the Chinese government. And after thousands of years, that's basically how these ideologies have been passed down. So a couple of the ideas are, for example, the fact that you should save first and then spend your money later, so you're always paying yourself first. And number 2, you should always have some emergency reserves. Both of these in Chinese culture actually trace back to Confucian teachings about living a virtuous life. The second reason why Chinese people are so good at saving money, I think, has to do with family dynamics. There's often an expectation of the younger generation to help support their parents as they get older, and it's not uncommon for Chinese kids to live with their parents even in adult age. These dynamics make it so that perhaps if you are a kid growing up in China, or perhaps a Chinese American kid like me, you might want to save a little bit of extra money because you know that someday you're going to have to provide for your parents who are going to retire maybe somewhat soon. And the third top reason why I think Chinese people are so good at saving money is they simply prioritize education. So if you are from an immigrant family, usually education is one of those highly emphasized things that your parents care a lot about growing up, because they think that the key to success is going to be going to a good college and then getting a good job. While that's an entirely different topic for another video, oftentimes my point here is that families are going to try to save a lot of money in preparation for tuition expenses, and that's kind of what you're going to see. So these are some of the main intrinsic reasons why the Chinese are so into saving, but what is the ancient 4-column accounting method and how does it work? The 4-column method is a simple formula where you take your beginning balance at the start of the month, then you add your increases, so your income and your side hustle money, and then you subtract any decreases. So these are all your expenses, and then the last final column or the box is for your ending balance. Now, I know that this looks and might sound pretty simple, and that's because it is, and that's the beauty. It should be really simple to save and budget your money on your way to your first 10K or maybe your next 10K. This type of method is also really closely related to the zero-based budgeting system. That's where you project out and forecast every single dollar before the month begins. But the reason why the 4-column accounting method is different and much more powerful is that it forces you to account for every single dollar. The 4-column method then is more of an accounting/tracking system after your money has been spent. And the reason why it's better, in my opinion, is that you literally cannot lie to yourself about where your money went. After you figure out where your money goes using this method, you will then use everything that you've learned about your previous month of spending to inform your next month of behavior. So let me give you an example. Let's pretend you are in your second job out of college and you make $5,000 a month after tax. You start with a beginning balance of $8,000 in your checking account, so your first column would be $8,000 in this case. In your second column, these are your increases. So perhaps you make the $5,000 of after-tax salary, you make $800 freelancing, you have $120 in investment dividends, and you sell some stuff on Facebook Marketplace this month for $200. That means your second column totals are $6,120 for the month. The third column is where it gets a little bit interesting. These are your decreases for the month. So in this column, you might track all of your expenses and your spending might look like the following. For your necessities, you're spending $2,800 total, so $2,600 on rent and $200 on utilities like electricity and the internet. For your transportation, you're spending $870 a month between your car payment, gas, insurance, and parking. Then you might spend $850 on food, broken up between $500 on groceries and $350 on eating out, getting coffee, or lunches. You then spend another $800 on entertainment or perhaps the gym membership, clothing, golf, yoga classes, etc. And lastly, you have a credit card balance that you need to pay off every single month. It's $400 a month. And then you have a student loan payment of $500 and a personal loan that you owe $200 a month on. If you add up this entire column of expenses, these amount to $6,470. That means in the fourth column, your ending balance is $7,700, or basically you spent $300 more than you earned this month while saving absolutely nothing. So if you were using this 4-column accounting method, you could easily visually see that you are probably living paycheck to paycheck, or you might have to go into more debt this month than you just had previously. This will force you to look at your expenses on the categories where you can cut back, and it creates accountability for you because you want to see your ending balance be higher than your beginning balance at the end of the month. And the nice part about this method is that it gives you an easy way to match up what your bank balance actually reflects at the end of the month and what your own accounting came up with. If you are off in any way, that means you perhaps didn't do the accounting correctly, and it forces you to take a look at your expenses or perhaps your income again. Now, the nice part about this method is that you don't have to start this on the first of every month. Whatever date you are watching this right now, you could start today. If you're really hardcore about this, you could look back at your last 3 months of credit card and bank statements, you add up everything and see what your beginning and ending balances would have been for the last 3 months. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. That might take you a lot of work. It might take you an afternoon of work, but I believe that if you were to go through this exercise, you would learn a lot about your own spending habits, and it would force you to uncomfortably look at the things that you actually might be spending money on. Now, this is a very practical method to save money, but sometimes personal finance is about the behaviors and the principles that you live out day to day. Those can also help you build wealth too. So I wanted to share with you 3 main factors and behaviors that help the Chinese prioritize saving money that you can essentially copy. The first is that the majority of Chinese people don't like to show off. Of course, you're gonna have some of these crazy rich Asian types showing off their Gucci bags and their Bottega Veneta, whatever that brand is called. But in general, a lot of Chinese people that are wealthy, they like to keep a low profile. That usually means that they're gonna be a lot happier with the things that they already have. Oftentimes, I don't think we are grateful enough for the basic necessities that we might have, such as a bed to sleep in, access to food, or access to clean water. There are so many countries out there that lack these basic resources, and by keeping a humble and low profile, we can kind of simply look at our life and be appreciative of what we actually have. Famously, in a study in 1978, there were lottery winners that reported being similarly happy before and after winning the lottery. The findings showed that having a large monetary gain had no effect on their levels of happiness in the long term. Sure, they might have had a huge spike in dopamine levels as well as their happiness in the weeks after they won the lottery, but after a year or two, it didn't really make them happier. They just simply got used to having more money, and their happiness levels returned to their baseline. The second behavior that you can copy in your own life is that when Chinese people earn their money, their goal is to usually live off a smaller percentage of what they just made and to save the remainder. When I saved $10,000 using this method, my whole goal was to have a savings rate closer to 50% or perhaps 40% of my income. I knew that if I were able to live off a lower amount, I would keep my lifestyle inflation in check and also build up my savings quite quickly. Now compare that savings rate of, let's say, even 25% to the average American who saves 5% or maybe even at most 10% of their income every month. Or even worse, compare it to the average American who has too big of a car payment and lives paycheck to paycheck. I think if you can be disciplined enough to live off a smaller percentage of your income within reason, it can save you a lot of money. There are going to be some exceptions to this rule. So for example, if you aren't making enough money where you can't even save, then you perhaps need to work on your income first. However, my point here is that the 4-column accounting method can hopefully assist you with optimizing what you are already making and spending. And the third behavioral factor why the Chinese are so good with money is that a lot of Chinese people are what I like to call value-based spenders. What I mean by that is that they're always trying to get the most value for their dollar. This value-based spending ties back to Confucian values of frugality, but it could also show up in what's called necessary spending versus face spending. And no, I'm not talking about great skincare, although that is technically part of, spending money on your face. But in Chinese culture, face spending would refer to social status. So spending money to either maintain or boost it, and that's not always practical. Chinese people like to spend their money on necessities, so the things that really matter, like education, health, property, and family. But when it comes to wants, they may still buy something that they ultimately want, but they want to make sure that they get a good value or good deal out of it. Basically, Chinese people don't like getting ripped off. I mean, who does? If you're trying to manage your money like the top 1% do, I'm gonna explain today the 60-30-10 system that you can follow along in this video. That way, even if you aren't in the 1% yet, if you're able to follow this rule and stay consistent, you'll have a framework to build your wealth with and hopefully achieve incredible things. Now, if that happens, please invite me on your mega yacht, which you will eventually have with a private chef so that we can eat a bunch of sushi prepared for us and you can pick up the tab. Don't worry though, I will pick up the tip. That's the least I could do. Now, to understand the 60-30-10 rule, first you got to understand the rule that preceded it, which is the long-standing 50-30-20 rule in personal finance, and I personally think it's dead. For a long time, the 50-30-20 rule is just the most commonly accepted money management rule out there, and it says that you should dedicate 50% of your budget to needs, and that's the 50 in that rule. We'll get to the other two numbers, the 30 and the 20, later on in this video, but for now, I just want to share with you guys that I think it's actually pretty outdated as of 2024. The problem is the rampant inflation that we've been facing in the past 4 years. It's basically made this rule generally very hard to stick to. I'm sure the cost of living wherever you are has gone up, and these days, the price prices of even fast casual food is out of this world, even to the point where, quote, nearly 80% of Americans now view fast food as a luxury. And offenders like McDonald's have increased the prices of their menu items by a significant amount since 2014. Like, since when should the quarter pounder with cheese meal cost $11.99? It should mostly cost around $5 in my opinion. So if you aren't making that much of an income, let's say you're making 15 or 20 bucks an hour, it's likely the amount of money that you are spending on your needs is easily going to exceed 50% of your total income. It's even harder on the coasts of America. Let's pretend you live in San Francisco like I do, where the median rent of a studio apartment is $21.83 a month according to apartments.com. And after you add in utilities, groceries, transportation, etc., your monthly needs bill could easily cost you at least $3,000 a month. If your needs are supposed to stay within 50% of your income based on that 50-30-20 rule, then that means we need to be taking home at least 2x that, or $6,000 a month. That's $72,000 a year in after-tax income, but pre-tax, that means you need to be making around $100,000 per year. So right then and there, if you're living in a studio in a high cost of living area, it's going to be really hard or even impossible to keep your needs under 50% unless you're making a higher income. Honestly, I've polled a lot of my viewers, and for most people, the amount that they spend on needs will usually make up between 55, 60, or even 65% of their income. Now, if you are one of those people that are able to keep their needs bill under 50%, that's amazing, and I will have some tips for you on how to optimize your extra money towards the end of this video, so make sure to stick around for that. But for now, that's really why I think the 50-30-20 rule is outdated and instead should be updated to the 60-30-10 rule. So let's explain first the 60 and the 60-30-10. 60% of your money will be allocated towards needs is exactly what this system calls for. Now, your first step is to figure out your post-tax income, and what we really want to avoid is basically using our gross income with this rule, so our income before tax, because that's not the most accurate representation of our money, and the after-tax income is actually really what matters. Your budget is going to be about 60% of your after-tax income to your needs, or AKA everything you need to survive. So first, housing. A roof over your head is exactly what you should be shooting for. We're not talking about like a luxury high-rise apartment with a doorman, just something within your means is what you should consider. Utilities are also going to be part of this housing expense because you can't have your water shut off or have no electricity, so make sure you add this in there too. Another component of your needs are just straight up groceries. We need food to keep our life going, and hopefully you have a good habit of making food at home and cooking for yourself in an economical way. Now, when it comes to going out to eat, in my opinion, eating out is more of a want rather than a need, and that's going to be covered in the next section. So for food, I think the spending that falls under needs is just the minimum that you need to survive. So I'm just talking about plain old groceries, and that's the only thing that you should be counting here. Then we have our healthcare. So hopefully you have some sort of healthcare covered by your employer or by your government, depending on what country you're watching from. But this is something we don't want to cheap out on if we need to pay out of pocket for. As some people say, health is wealth, and this is definitely true, because if you don't have good health, then you can't live a normal life. So make sure to prioritize that, and this definitely goes into the needs category. Now, transportation is something we need in America, and that will likely come in the form of a car. But if you are just spending on a car, just make sure it's within reason and follows affordability rules. I do have a bunch of videos on those rules I can leave down below in the description for you guys if you'd like to check those out after this video. And another thing that you can check out right now is that subscribe button down below. It looks a little bit lonely, doesn't it? So I hope that you can fix its loneliness problem and just give it a little bit of a click, and thank you very much. Lastly, in the needs section, I think that should also include minimum payments on debt, because if you can't make those payments, your credit score could tank. And in America, at least, a lot of your financial life will revolve around your credit score. So I definitely really want to add this into the needs category. All right, so we have the 60% of the 60-30-10 rule covered. Now, I do want to emphasize that this entire rule is merely a guideline that you should try for, and if you're able to consistently lower your needs percentages throughout your life, that will give you the extra cushion you need to use that money elsewhere, such as investing for your future. Ideally, if your needs are less than 60%, you aren't allocating that extra cushion of extra dollars that you might have towards your wants, because your wants should only be accounting for 30% of your total budget, and that's the 30 in the 60-30-10 rule. Okay, so when it comes to your wants, here's a list of things that I would classify as a want. For example, clothing, restaurants, vacations, entertainment, gym memberships, coffee at Starbucks or any other coffee house you might like, and also subscriptions could be an example of a want or a discretionary expense. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what you're working with, so anything that isn't absolutely required for you to live day to day should be called a want. And it's definitely okay to have 30% of your budget allocated towards wants, because otherwise, what's the point of living? We want to make sure that we are spending money though in a purposeful manner and living life to the fullest that is at least within reason. Now, of course, within this list of items, there's definitely going to be some of you out there that are watching and you're going to argue with me. You're going to be like, Humphrey, you definitely need clothes to live. You can't go out and walk around without a shirt on. So to that, I would say it depends on who you are, first of all.
Seriously? It's like you're photoshopped.
But yes, you are right. Some clothing is a need, underwear, socks, shirts, etc. But for the most part, when you buy clothes, I would typically classify those costs as mostly a want because most of us have clothes already. Moving forward, you don't need to buy new clothes all the time. Again, this is just a guideline. Don't get too smart with me here, guys. You guys generally know what type of spending is necessary versus what type of spending is just for fun. Now let's actually dive into the 10 of the 60-30-10 rule, which is the savings and investing portion. So if you recall in the 50-30-20 rule, the last number, the 20, was for your savings and investments. As you can see with this new rule, the 60-30-10, 10% of those savings and investments have been shifted towards the needs section, which yeah, it kind of sucks. However, what I do want to illustrate with you in this video today is that even if you invest and save just 10% of your after-tax income on a regular basis, that you can still become wealthy and possibly in the top 1%. Let's take someone who's the age of 25 making $50,000 a year, so $40,000 a year after tax. Now, assuming their salary stays fixed over their entire career, so they never get a new job, they never get a promotion, they just do the same thing until they're 67 years old and ready for retirement, but they invest 10% of their income consistently, they're going to be able to have a balance of $1.314 million by the time that they're age 67, assuming an 8% return on their money. This 8% return can be achieved through investing, and we'll talk about what to invest in the next section of this video. Now, while this total balance of $1.314 million is not top 1% net worth by any means, it's still going to be a comfortable retirement for this individual, and here's why. If this person makes $40,000 a year after tax, and let's say they spend 90% of it on the rest of their expenses, so needs and wants combined, that's $36,000 a year that they're going to spend. If we assume they spend $36,000 a year and multiply that by 25, we'll get our financial independence number of $900,000. That means assuming a 4% withdrawal rate in retirement, so that means they can withdraw 4% of their total retirement balance every single year, all they would need is $900,000 to live comfortably for a 30-year retirement based on that spending. Now, in our example, our person had $1.314 million just investing 10% of their income on a regular basis. So the 10% in the 60-30-10 rule is definitely doable in terms of hitting your retirement goals. And if you consider that the average American only saves 3.7% of their income, if we can hit 10%, that should be rather stellar. Now, the true method to actually get yourself into the top 1% is to actually understand that the 60-30-10 rule is a guideline. I've said this throughout the video, but the idea here is that if you are someone who is progressing through their career and actually earning more money over time, you can actually allocate the extra dollars to saving and investing and try to lower the proportions of your needs and wants in your budget. So to give you an example, perhaps you start to get a raise and then maybe 1 month, the 10% of your 60-30-10 rule becomes 12% because now all of a sudden you're making more money. And so therefore, if you keep your needs and wants exactly the same, the percentages of those specific numbers will go down. The idea here is that if you just keep your lifestyle the exact same whenever you start to make more money and you put that extra money towards savings and investing, that's going to really compound your wealth as quickly as possible. Make sure though that any of the money that you have saved is actually earning a return on your money. Hopefully that should go without saying, but even if it's just in a high yield savings account for the time being, at least it's earning something for sitting there. Now, besides using a personal finance rule like the 60-30-10 rule, the high net worth individuals and self-made millionaires out there also have really good habits when it comes to just in general personal finance, and the first one is that they don't overspend. According to a CFP that manages money for wealthy individuals, he says that, quote, while these clients do enjoy some of life's finer things, dogs, the CFP, says that they typically do not overspend. For example, they'll purchase a certified pre-owned car versus buying a brand new one. They'll search for good deals on vacations, and they may upgrade themselves to economy plus on an airline, but you really won't catch them paying for first class. They'll keep their existing cell phones as long as they are working and don't feel the need to upgrade every time new technology comes out. Another great lesson of the wealthy is that high income does not equal high wealth. So how much you earn doesn't actually mean you're going to be automatically in the top 1%. So if you earned $1 million a year, but you spent $990,000 of it, you're only going to have a difference of $10,000 per year to save and invest. Compare that to somebody who makes $100K per year, spends $80,000 of it, but then has $20,000 to save and invest instead. Being able to control your spending and then allocating the extra income to investing will get you where you want to go, and you just kind of have to trust that process. Now, a lot of you guys are going to ask, yes, but what do I actually invest in? So I have two important things to share when it comes to investing. Number one, make sure you are investing in tax advantaged accounts first and foremost, and the first account that I would like to talk about is the Roth IRA individual retirement account. Other countries have very similar equivalents to the Roth IRA, so I will put up a list of them on the screen right now. But essentially, the Roth IRA allows you to contribute after-tax dollars into this account, but the main advantage is that all of your earnings and profits in this account grow tax-free. That means when you retire and you withdraw all the earnings on this account, so all of the profits, you won't be paying any taxes on it. Now, if you're under the age of 50, you can only contribute $7,000 a year into it. And if you're over the age of 50, you can contribute $8,000 per year as a sort of catch-up mechanism. Another note is that if you somehow make too much money, for example, you guys out there that are making more than $161,000 per year, you can't contribute to a Roth IRA. However, what you can do, which I think is pretty funny, at least in the United States, is that you can open up a traditional IRA account, you contribute to that traditional IRA account, and then you just simply roll those funds over into a Roth IRA, and that's called the backdoor Roth IRA. It sounds like some crazy secret out there because it's called the backdoor, but if you Google it, literally all of these companies will incentivize you and encourage you to do it as well. It's pretty much the world's worst kept secret. Now, the one thing to watch out for is that if you are ever pursuing a backdoor Roth is something called the pro rata rule, which states that if you have both pre-tax and after-tax funds in your traditional IRA, you can't convert only the after-tax portion. So if you are someone who has existing pre-tax funds in your traditional IRA, there are some ways to get around this, and I will leave some links down below with relevant information on the pro rata rule specifically. All right, tip number 2 is to invest in low-cost, broadly diversified funds. Now, in terms of what to invest in order to get that 8% like I've discussed earlier, we're going to be mostly investing in low-cost, broadly diversified index funds that track the market. So an example would be like the index, the S&P 500. An index fund is a type of individual fund that by buying that one fund, you own a small piece of everything that that fund owns. So an S&P 500 index fund, for example, would track the 500 largest companies in the United States. And that way you just buy the S&P 500 index fund, and then you get a small piece of every little company in the S&P 500. Now, for the majority of youngish people out there, investing in an S&P 500 index fund is a pretty good way to go, but there are other index funds out there. For example, the Total Stock Market Index, or ticker symbol VTI or VTSAX, which covers all of the United States stocks, is also pretty good. If you're on the older side, so getting up to 50 years old and upwards, I would probably consider adding more fixed income to your portfolios in order to balance it out, but that is definitely going to be a topic for a future video or something that you can learn about in some of my other videos on the channel. If you want to grow your net worth from $0 and really explode it, it's not about finding that perfect investment or following some sort of get rich quick course. It's about following a very simple, boring stack of behaviors consistently over time. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact 5 layers that I call the boring stack. Now, if you follow all 5 layers, I can almost guarantee that you will hit your net worth goals, including your first 100K. So let's start with layer number 1 today, knowing your number. All right, so let's say your goal is $100,000 and you want to push your limits and try to attain it in exactly 1 year. In order to do that, you would have to know exactly what your time needs to be valued at in order to hit your goal. Studies show that if you're able to write down goals that are very specific and measurable, you are 42% more likely to hit them, Now, on the flip side, vague goals are going to produce vague results. So the first thing that we need to do is actually pretty boring. It's to figure out the actual number that we are targeting. $100,000 in a single year is $273 a day, but if you're only counting the 260 working days that we have in a year, that will jump up to around $384 per day. Or roughly speaking, you would have to make around $48 an hour in a standard work week. Now, of course, even if you were making $48 an hour and making $100,000 a year, you're not exactly taking home $100,000 a year. There are going to be bills, taxes, expenses, etc. So maybe a better stretch goal here is to actually hit it in 3 to 5 years. At 3 years, we would need to net save. So that means after all expenses, $91 per day. And if we wanted to hit it in 5 years, we would need to save around $55 per day. So perhaps you even make a table for yourself, which is what I did originally. I mapped out how much I needed to save based on a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, and 7-year time horizon. The timeline that's going to be right for you is going to depend on how much you make, how much you can save, and also perhaps some of your investing returns. But investing returns aren't everything, because Morgan Housel, the author of the book, The Psychology of Money, says that, quote, building wealth has little to do with your income or investment returns and lots to do with your savings rate. Now, that's not what Wall Street or crypto day traders want you to hear, but the math is actually shockingly simple. If you save and invest $15,000 a year and earn a 4.5% return, after 6 years, you would have around $105,000, but 85% of that actually came from your savings and only 15% came from your investment returns. Okay, but let's pretend you are a great investor and you average 10% per year. You'll actually hit it in 5 years, but savings will still make up 77% of your first 100K. Lastly, let me give you an extreme example. Let's pretend you invest $10,000 per year, and this time you are averaging 20% returns every single year, which is nuts, by the way. That's maybe close to what Warren Buffett was able to accomplish over periods of his career. It would take you still about 5 years to hit $100,000, and even then, 60% of it, or the majority, is still comprised of savings, and 40% is investment returns. So the boring truth here is that the first 100K is actually a savings game and not an investing game. You saw that we just got 20% returns, but the majority still came from savings. So that's layer number one. You want to figure out your number, reverse engineer the timeline, and then write down that weekly or monthly target that you have, and you want to put it somewhere where you will actually see it. Let's move on to layer number two. This is one of my favorites. It's to become hard to replace. By being hard to replace, you will make more money. That's just the simple fact of it. So if you wanted to make $273 a day, you need a skill or a certain set of skills in order to command that type of pay. In this world of AI that we live in, it's increasingly becoming really hard to stand out because AI can do a lot of what humans can do already and sometimes even better. But let me give you a practical example that can show you the difference in value that a skill can give you. Let's pretend for a moment that you are the country's top brain surgeon in America, so you have a specialized skill right there. Of course, there are tons of general practitioners. Those people make great money. There are lots of doctors and physicians and nurses, but the one person making way more than all of those other medical professionals is the top brain surgeon in the country. You might be able to swap your physician for another physician and get pretty comparable results, but if you're trying to find a brain surgeon and there's maybe a handful of them out there, then those people are going to command a huge premium on that market. Now, you don't have to be a brain surgeon. I'm not saying you have to do that in order to get that $100,000 in net worth and beyond, but you definitely want to have a skill that isn't easily replaceable by AI or another person, because therefore you will make more money. Trade skills, for example, can't be replaced by AI that easily. So if you're an electrician, an HVAC guy, or a plumber, you cannot outsource this to a robot just yet, and these skills are highly defensible against AI. Another skill I believe is defensible against AI is something like excellent communications writing. In our current world where everyone is using ChatGPT to write their internal or external communications, I believe that all the communications are starting to sound kind of the same.
First off, you're not crazy. You're human.
So because ChatGPT often uses repetitive phrasing and it sounds a little bit robotic, the thing that will stand out is a real human connection or perspective when it comes to writing. I believe that individuality will become very scarce and therefore valuable because it will stand out in a sea where everything sounds the same. So try to think of all the skills that you're interested in and ask yourself, can that skill be replaced by a robot? If the answer is no, then also ask yourself, can it be replaced by a human? You want skills that are hard to replace because it just comes down to supply and demand. If there's less supply of a valuable skill that you have, you will be more in demand and therefore you will be able to make more money in the job market. Let's move on to layer number 3 today. We talked about how to earn income as well as how to figure out what your number is in order to hit $100,000 as quickly as possible, but we still need to talk about the other side of the equation, which is spending. Every dollar you don't spend gets you closer to that $100,000 number. That's because if you aren't spending it, you have an opportunity to save it and invest it towards 100K. So let's make this practical. I have 3 easy tips for you. The first is what I like to call the 24-hour rule. This is probably the single most effective thing that I use in my personal life in order to cut back on spending. Before any non-essential purchase that's over $100, you want to wait 24 hours before you actually buy the thing. Now, $100 is just the number that I chose in my head, but for you, it could be $25, it could be $50, or it could be $75, etc. You just want to make sure that the number you choose is a number that's a little bit of a stretch as to what you don't spend on a regular basis. So for me, I know that oftentimes I might go out to eat with a friend and that might be $50 for lunch, so I don't really think too much about those purchases. However, if I'm about to buy something that's $120, like a trackpad from Apple, I'm going to be thinking about that purchase a little bit harder. Most spending decisions aren't planned, so they're pretty emotional actually. So by giving yourself 24 hours between when you see the item and when you actually purchase that item that's over, let's say $100, that gives you this gap of time to really question if you really need this item or not. What you'll actually find in most cases is that after 24 hours, you might not even want that item anymore, and that's how you're gonna save a little bit of extra cash. The second practical tip that I have for you is to do easy alternate swaps. So whenever you're about to spend money, think about if there's a less costly alternative to doing so. If you go to Starbucks every day, why don't you try making coffee at home? If you like eating out every meal, perhaps you switch it up and meal prep for a week to see how much money you could save. And my favorite, when you do go out for lunch, maybe you keep it simple. Maybe you get the sandwich, but you skip the chips and you skip the drink, and this small decision will save you money over longer periods of time. And the last tip that I have for you guys to cut costs is to look at the biggest 3 categories where most people spend money in. That's going to be housing, cars, or food. So if you are really serious about hitting $100,000 as quickly as possible, you have to think about where your money is going in relation to these 3 big categories. For example, let's pretend you currently live by yourself and you pay $1,500 a month in rent, but your lease is coming due. The question then worth asking is, could I get a roommate for my next lease, or could I live 15 minutes further than where I live right now if it saves me an extra $500 a month? Because if some of the answers to these questions are yes, then you should absolutely do so. The power of saving that extra $300 to $500 a month is going to change your life dramatically, especially if you do it early on. Now, after you do that exercise with housing, then I want you to do the same exercise with your car as well as the food that you are eating. With your car, are there ways to lower your car costs? Perhaps you look into comparing auto insurance offers across different providers, and you might be able to save $100 or $150 a month doing that. I'll link a car insurance comparison tool down below in the description where you can easily check to see if you're already getting the best offer on insurance, so you could try to save some money there. Or you might even sell your current car, which has a really high monthly payment. You would get a reliable used car instead, and then you would save the monthly difference. I want you to understand this is not about being too cheap or too frugal. You are simply just being intentional with your money. There's a big difference between being cheap and being deliberate, and I think if you are deliberate and intentional with your money, you will be in the right frame of mind to change overall all your financial habits. All right, so now we know our number. You're going to become harder to replace as well, and you're cutting unnecessary costs. So what is layer number 4? And that is going to be automating these behaviors. James Clear says it best in Atomic Habits. He said that in order to form a good habit, we shouldn't aim to rely on motivation. We want to design our environment so that the right behavior just happens automatically and happens naturally. In fact, research has shown that those who pay themselves first, also known as automatic savers, they will usually hit or exceed their savings target more often than manual savers, so those that don't automate their savings. And from a psychological standpoint, this makes a lot of sense. If and when you get paid, you have a small percentage of that paycheck going automatically towards your savings goals. You're not going to be tempted to spend that money, and that's the right environment to encourage the right behavior. As humans, we face so many financial decisions every single day, and if you have to make every single one of those manually, that's a decision that you could possibly get wrong, and in fact, we often get them wrong when left to our own devices. So I would say take the time to set up some sort of automatic savings transfer plan. If you work for somebody else, you can either do it on the payroll side with your employer, or you can simply set up an automatic transfer in your own online banking. Say you make $2,000 every 2 weeks, try setting it up so you save $400 automatically every pay period that gets split between a savings account and an investment account. And that means at least every month you'll have at least $800 you have to work with when it comes to saving or investing. All right, this brings me to my 5th layer of our stack today, and it's honestly the hardest of them all because it doesn't require any skill. It just requires something that people severely underestimate, and that is time. Everything that we've talked about in this video, it doesn't work if you quit after 3 months. I said this in a previous video, but building wealth does not give you instant feedback. It's not like when you go out on the golf course, you know you're about to hit this ball, and then you hit the ball and maybe it goes nowhere. When it goes nowhere, you know that you just hit a bad shot. Therefore, you are getting instant feedback on how well you just struck that ball. Your direct input in this case had a direct result, which was that the ball went nowhere. Therefore, if you wanted to iterate on that feedback, at that point you could, but with investing and growing your wealth, it's going to be vastly different. There's a huge delay in what you are doing now versus what your expected result is going to be. Because of this long delay, I can guarantee you that there will be some people that watch this video, they will do everything that I say in this video to a T. They will not see the results in the next 3 months, and guess what? They will abandon their entire plan. You can do everything right in the next 3 months, 6 months, even a year, and you will assume it's not working because your net worth is not moving or you're not seeing those results. If you are starting from zero, I think that your expectation should be that you're gonna hit $100,000 in roughly 4 to 7 years. Am I saying that it's impossible to hit it within 1 year? No. I know some people that have done that, but they've also been able to increase their income at an incredible pace because of some business or side hustle that they started and it just took off. But here's what I want you to think about. 4 to 7 years is gonna happen no matter what you do. That time is gonna pass. The only question is whether you're gonna be at $100,000 in net worth or more when it does, or you're still at zero or close to zero wondering what happened. So I didn't say it was exciting, I said it was boring. The boring path does work, it just requires a lot of time and it requires discipline. Do it for longer than it feels reasonable, and I promise you that if you trust the process, the results will come. All right, thanks for being here. Peace.